Picture a stage, not a grand stage, not velvet curtains and chandeliers and an orchestra warming up in the pit below. Picture a wooden platform, maybe 12 feet wide and 8 feet deep, nailed together from boards that don't quite match, gaps between them wide enough to lose a coin. Above it, a canvas canopy that leaks when it rains, which in London is most of the time. Around it, gas lamps on poles that make everything yellow and hot and slightly unreal, like the world is on fire, but only just. The smell of those lamps is something between burning fat and warm metal, and it never quite leaves your clothes. Now fill it with a crowd, not a polite crowd, not the kind that files quietly into rows and waits with folded hands. This is a Friday night crowd in the Westminster Aquarium on Tothill Street, London, 1882. Working men in flat caps who've had 3 pints and want to have 4. Women who've brought their children because the admission is cheaper than a music hall, and the children won't stop asking. Clerks and shopkeepers with their collars still on, but their dignity mostly loosened. A few gentlemen in the back, standing slightly apart, pretending they're here out of intellectual curiosity, rather than because something about this whole arrangement gives them a feeling they don't have a name for. Add the smell of 200 bodies that have been working all week and haven't all had the opportunity for a bath. Add tobacco, cheap tobacco, the kind that smells like burning rope. Add the faint sweet rot of sawdust on a floor that hasn't been properly cleaned since Tuesday. Add something underneath it all, something animal and close and human. The specific smell of people who are excited and slightly afraid and not quite sure if what they're about to feel is acceptable. That's the Westminster Aquarium on a Friday night. And now, standing on that platform bathed in that yellow gaslight is you. You're 7 feet and 1 inch tall. You are 22 years old. Your name is Thomas William Marsh, and you are from a village called Holt in Norfolk, which is a quiet place where nothing much happens and everyone knows everyone else's business, and the tallest building for miles in any direction is a church tower, and even the church tower is shorter than you by about 4 inches. You have been standing on stages like this one for 14 months. The crowd is not applauding, they are laughing, not at anything you've done. You haven't done anything yet, you're just standing there, which is enough apparently because that's what they paid to see. The programme calls you the Norfolk Colossus. The handwritten card on the easel beside the platform says Thomas Marsh, 7 feet 1 inch, born in Norfolk, England, a genuine giant of the British Isles, no tricks, no platform shoes, a true wonder of nature. Please do not touch the exhibits. The please do not touch the exhibits part is not always respected. You have learned to stand very still. You've learned to keep your face in a particular expression, not a smile, because a real smile looks wrong under these lights, too human, too close to ordinary, but a kind of patient blankness that the crowd finds satisfying. You are the exhibit. You are the wonder. You are the thing they came to see. And honestly, some nights you've almost forgotten that you were ever anything else. So I make these history stories, and I genuinely don't know if you're listening because you want to fall asleep or because something about the idea of a 7-foot man standing in a gaslit hall while strangers pay 6pence to stare at him strikes you as interesting in a way you can't quite justify. Either way, get comfortable, because we're going in. And this one isn't a comfortable place. We're going back to 1882, to the freak show circuit, to the back rooms and the wagon beds and the morning negotiations over who gets the good billing and who gets the drafty tent at the end of the row. We're going to smell sawdust and grease paint and cheap gin and the particular misery of people who have been turned into merchandise. We're going to live one stretch of time as someone who was sold, in a very real sense, to the entertainment industry of Victorian England. Sold is maybe too strong a word. Most of them signed contracts. Most of those contracts they couldn't fully read. Subscribe if you want, get comfortable, turn off whatever else is happening in your head. Here we go. The crowd is still laughing when Mr. Josiah Crane steps up onto the platform beside you. Mr. Josiah Crane is 5 feet 4 inches tall, which means the top of his head comes to approximately your shoulder. He is 51 years old, though he tells people 45 because it sounds better, and nobody can prove otherwise. He has a magnificent moustache, waxed into points at the ends, that he touches when he's thinking and straightens when he's performing and pulls on when he's angry, which means you've learned to watch the moustache the way a sailor watches the sky for weather. He's wearing his red coat tonight. The red coat means it's a Friday or Saturday, which means a full house, which means Mr. Crane is investing the full performance of himself. On Tuesdays and Wednesdays, when the crowds are thin and mostly elderly women and bored apprentices, he wears the brown coat. The difference between the red coat and the brown coat is the difference between Mr. Crane in high spirits and Mr. Crane in the particular mood that has, over the past 14 months, taught you the exact dimensions of exactly how much trouble you can be in without quite crossing the line into dismissal. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Crane says, and his voice does something extraordinary. It becomes enormous. It fills the hall the way a church organ fills a nave, rolling out in waves, bouncing off the walls and the ceiling and coming back slightly amplified. Slightly more than one man should be able to produce from one pair of lungs. It's a voice that's been trained over 30 years on fairgrounds and in halls from Plymouth to Edinburgh. A voice that has sold things that probably weren't worth selling and convinced people to pay for things they hadn't wanted until the moment it described them. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the genuine article, no trickery, no deception, no mirrors, no platforms, no special boots. He gestures at you. This man was born in Norfolk, England. His mother is an ordinary woman of ordinary height. His father was an ordinary man. And yet, somewhere in the workings of Providence, this extraordinary individual was given to the world at a size that defies the ordinary entirely. He pauses. The crowd has gone quiet. They always go quiet when Mr. Crane pauses, because the pause is itself a performance, calibrated to the precise duration that creates maximum anticipation without allowing people to start coughing or shifting in their seats. 7 feet, he says, and 1 inch. A sound from the crowd, not quite a gasp, something between a gasp and a murmur. The specific sound of 200 people recalibrating their sense of what's possible. Any gentleman in the house, Mr. Crane continues, is welcome to stand beside our Thomas to verify the measurement for himself. Any gentleman who can demonstrate to the satisfaction of the audience that our Thomas here falls short of the advertised dimensions will receive his sixpence returned immediately. Nobody moves. Nobody ever moves. You stand there, the way you've learned to stand, your hands at your sides, your face doing the patient blank thing, and you think about dinner. Dinner was bread and a piece of cold mutton. It was adequate. It was not wonderful. The bread had been good this morning when it was fresh, but had spent the afternoon getting hard, and the mutton was yesterday's, reheated over a spirit lamp by Mrs. Dobbs, who manages the kitchen arrangements for Mr. Crane's company of human curiosities, which is what the poster calls you, and what the contracts call you, and what nobody calls you to your face except in the specific context of promotional materials. To each other, you're something else. The company has its own language, its own hierarchy, its own particular way of being a small society inside the larger society that pays to look at you. But you'll get to that. Right now there's a man coming up out of the crowd. He's about 40, thick around the middle, in a good coat that suggests he's a tradesman of some prosperity. He has the specific look of a man who's been dared by his friends, or possibly his wife, and is now committed to seeing it through. He stands beside you. His head comes to your chest. Actually, his head comes to slightly below your chest. The actual top of his head is approximately level with the third button of your jacket. The crowd erupts. And here is the thing about that sound. Here is the thing that nobody outside this world quite understands until they've stood in the gaslight and heard it. It is a sound of genuine wonder. Underneath the laughter, underneath the exclamations and the pointing and the nudging of companions, there is something else, something almost religious. The sound people make when something they thought they understood about the world turns out to be wrong. They didn't think a man could be this tall, and now they know he can. The man in the good coat looks up at you. His neck is craned almost vertical. "Does it hurt?" he asks, quietly so only you can hear. This question again. You get this question approximately every third evening. Sometimes in those exact words and sometimes in variations. Does the height hurt? Do your joints ache? Do you have to have special furniture? Can you sleep in an ordinary bed? Not much, you say. That's a lie. Your lower back aches every morning the way a door hinges after the frame has warped. Not a sharp pain, but a constant dull protest, the body arguing with its own proportions. Your knees are starting to go the way Mr. Crane warned you they would when you first arrived, saying it with the particular cheerfulness of a man describing a problem that belongs to someone else. The man nods as if "not much" is a satisfying answer and retreats back into the crowd looking slightly changed, like he's touched something he expected to be cold and found it warm. Mr. Crane is already moving on to the next introduction, but you're still standing there, thinking about that question. Does it hurt? You've been on this circuit for 14 months. You signed the contract in September of 1880, when you were 20 years old, in a room above a public house in Norwich that smelled of old beer and mouse droppings, by the light of a lamp that wasn't quite bright enough to read by comfortably. The man sitting across the table from you wasn't Mr. Crane. Mr. Crane sends men ahead of him, the way certain plants send out runners before they move into new territory. The man was named Cooper, just Cooper, no first name offered or requested. He was thin, precisely dressed, with the specific look of someone who is very good at seeming trustworthy, and whose entire skill set depends on people not looking too closely at the gap between the seeming and the being. He had a piece of paper. The piece of paper had a lot of words on it. You could read, which put you in a better position than approximately a third of the people who sat in that chair. You'd been to the parish school until you were 13, and then you'd worked on the farm, but you'd kept reading in the evenings because there wasn't much else to do in Holt in the evenings, and because your mother had a small collection of books, a Bible, a book of natural history with illustrations, 3 volumes of a serial novel she'd acquired from somewhere, and a manual of agricultural machinery that you had read approximately 30 times because it was the longest thing available. But Cooper's contract was a different kind of reading. It was written in the specific language of legal documents, which is designed not to hide things exactly, all the facts are technically there, but to place them in a context that makes them seem like something other than what they are. You signed it anyway. You signed it because Cooper had offered you 12 shillings a week, which was more than you earned in a month working the land. You signed it because your father had died in the spring and left debts that attached themselves to the farm like barnacles, and the farm was your mother's only income, and 12 shillings a week sent home regularly would keep her and your 2 younger sisters from a situation that you had spent considerable mental energy trying not to think about directly. You signed it because Cooper looked at you across the table with an expression of perfect sincerity and said, "Think of it as a career, Tom. A genuine career. Mr. Crane is a respectable man of business. You'd be part of a company, travel, good lodgings, regular meals. You signed it because you were 20 years old and had never been further from Holt than Norwich, which was 22 miles away, and London was a word that meant something so enormous it was closer to a concept than a place, and the idea of going there felt like the idea of going to the moon. Impossible, thrilling, probably inadvisable, absolutely necessary. So you signed it. Cooper blotted the paper, folded it, put it in his coat pocket, shook your hand with both of his, and gave you a card with an address on it, and instructions to present yourself on the first Monday of October. You went home and told your mother you'd found work. You didn't tell her what kind of work. You'll get to that part of the story later. Right now, the show is still going on around you. The Westminster Aquarium is a particular kind of place. It was built in 1876 as an actual aquarium, with tanks of fish and sea creatures, the kind of improving entertainment that the Victorians built with great confidence and then quickly discovered was not quite profitable enough to justify the outlay. The fish are still here, technically. There are tanks along one wall, and you can look at them if you want. Large greenish glass panels with things moving behind them, though the lighting isn't great and most of the fish are doing what fish generally do, which is swim around slowly in circles without obviously enjoying themselves. But the real business of the aquarium, the business that keeps the gas burning and the staff paid, is what they run in the central hall and the side rooms. The human curiosities. The strong man who can bend iron bars with his hands. The woman with a skin like an elephant, which is a medical condition and not a trick, and which she's been describing in clinical terms from the platform every evening since 1879, while doctors from various hospitals come to examine her and write papers about her without, as far as you can tell, asking her opinion on any of it. The twins from Bavaria who are joined at the hip and play the violin and the cello simultaneously in a way that would be genuinely moving if the crowd weren't mainly focused on the fact of their connection rather than the music. The man who is less than 3 feet tall and presents himself as General something, a title he claims to have earned in some campaign that shifts geographically depending on the audience. In London, it was the Crimea. In Birmingham, it was India. In Edinburgh, it became apparently the American Civil War, which is impressive considering the chronology. He's 60 years old and has been doing this since he was 7, and he is in many respects the most sophisticated person you've ever met. His name is Albert. Just Albert. General is the job. Albert is who he is at 11 in the morning, drinking tea in the back corridor and reading a newspaper and occasionally making remarks about current events that are dry and precise and would not embarrass a man of twice his education. Albert is the one who taught you the face, the patient blank face that you wear on stage. You can't look happy, he told you, during your second week, in the particular tone of someone explaining something obvious that should already have been obvious. Happy looks like you're putting it on. Crowds can smell performance. What you want is somewhere between dignified and distant, like you're a bishop at a garden party, present technically, but thinking about something more important, he demonstrated, His face shifted into something you can only describe as monumental, serene, ancient, like a portrait of a king who has been dead long enough to seem wise. That, he said, that's what they pay for. The sensation that they're in the presence of something genuinely different. Not a show. A fact. You practiced it in the mirror for 3 days before you got it right. It's still the most useful thing anyone has taught you here. The aquarium is not your only venue. You travel. Mr. Crane's company moves on a circuit. London for a month or 6 weeks. Then Birmingham, Manchester, Sheffield, Leeds. Back down through Nottingham and Leicester. A stint at a coastal resort in the summer, when the city empties out and the money moves to the seaside. You've done Scarborough in July, which was cold and wet in a way that felt personal, like the weather had made a specific decision about your enjoyment. The circuit is not glamorous, but it is regular. And regular, you've learned, is its own kind of luxury. The show runs until 10 o'clock on Friday and Saturday nights, 9 on weekdays, 8 on Sundays when they run at all, because Mr. Crane is, in his fashion, a man of principle about Sundays, which mostly means he attends church in the morning and drinks whiskey in the afternoon, and considers himself to have struck a reasonable balance. You step down from the platform at 10:05 on this particular Friday evening, and the first thing you do is roll your shoulders forward and feel something in your upper back make the specific sound that it has been making for the past 6 months. A soft grinding that isn't quite a crack, but isn't quite not a crack either. Somewhere in the middle of the spectrum of sounds that a body makes when it is being asked to hold itself in an unnatural position for extended periods. 3.5 hours on the platform tonight. 3.5 hours of standing while people come and go in waves, each wave paying their sixpence and getting their 10 or 15 minutes of staring at the exhibits, asking their questions, having their moment of contact with the genuinely extraordinary, and then moving on to the next platform, the next curiosity, the next departure from the normal run of things. You have done this approximately 400 times. You have answered the question, does it hurt, approximately 150 times. You have answered, how tall are you, approximately 300 times. You have answered, are you really that tall or is it an illusion, approximately 40 times. Always by stepping down from the platform and standing directly beside the asker, which generally answers the question more efficiently than any number of words. The back corridor of the Westminster Aquarium smells of gas and damp stone, and the particular institutional food smell of places where large numbers of people eat in practical circumstances rather than comfortable ones. Boiled everything, cheap cuts, tea that's been stewing in the pot since lunch. The aquarium's back of house is a series of rooms and passages that the audience never sees, which is where the actual lives of the performers happen, the lives that are not part of the performance. Eliza Chambers is already there when you arrive, sitting on an upturned crate with her boots off, rubbing her feet with an expression of professional relief. Eliza is one half of the Siamese beauties billing. The other half is her sister Grace, who is at this moment engaged in a very quiet argument with Mr. Crane in the doorway to the storage room. This happens most Friday nights. The argument is about the billing. Grace feels she should have top billing on the poster because she plays the cello, which requires more physical skill than the violin. Eliza plays the violin. The argument will resolve, as it always resolves, with Mr. Crane pointing out that neither of them has top billing individually because the billing belongs to the act, which is both sisters, and also with Mr. Crane doing the thing where he touches his moustache 3 times in rapid succession, which means he's restraining himself from saying something that would end the conversation definitively but also badly. The twins are joined at the hip, on the right side, a band of tissue about 8 inches wide. They have been joined their entire lives and operate with a kind of casual physical coordination that takes seeing from close range to fully appreciate. They walk together in a rolling gait that looks laboured until you notice they're moving at perfectly normal walking speed. They turn in unison. They climb stairs with an ease that suggests the body has been solving the problem since childhood and has found satisfactory answers. Their personalities are not at all the same. Grace is precise, sceptical, reads medical journals that she borrows from a doctor at St. Thomas's Hospital, who has been corresponding with her about her case for 3 years. Eliza tells stories, exaggerates cheerfully, once invented an entire noble ancestry for herself to tell to a journalist, and was only stopped from doing it a second time by Grace, physically taking the journalist's notebook and returning it to him. Good crowd, Eliza says, as you lower yourself onto a bench with the care of a tall person, sitting on furniture that may or may not be the right height. The bench is the right height. You have a specific bench. This is one of the small accommodations of being what Mr. Crane's promotional material calls of remarkable stature. Certain pieces of furniture need to be the right size, or certain things stop working properly, and one of those things is getting back up after sitting down. Good crowd, you agree. Man in the front row, Eliza says, was there for about 40 minutes, just stood there, watching. They do that sometimes. Do you know what he was staring at? Me, presumably. He was staring at your hands. I was watching him. He never looked at your face at all. Just your hands. Your hands are large. This is a proportional feature of being 7 feet 1, and it regularly surprises people more than the height itself, possibly because the height can be abstracted somehow. The brain can accept a very tall person as a kind of stretched version of a normal person. But the hands are concrete. Your hands are the same proportion to your body as any man's hands are to his body, which means they're roughly twice the size of an average man's hands, and this somehow reads as more wrong, more alien than the height. You look at your hands. Large, yes. Also calloused, from the farm work before this, and from the grip exercises Mr. Crane makes you do for the benefit of the occasional strength demonstrations he works into the act. Also reddened at the knuckles from cold, because it's been a cold October. Also, right now, slightly trembling, which is the fatigue of 3.5 hours of standing presenting itself in the way that fatigue always eventually presents itself. He probably wanted to see if they were real, you say. Everything's real, Eliza says philosophically, and goes back to rubbing her feet. You eat in the back room at 10:30. Mr. Crane's company has 12 performers at present, and when they're doing a London run, they eat together in whatever back room or anteroom is available in the current venue, which in the aquarium is a room used for storing spare gas fixtures when it isn't being used as a dining room, which means the smell of the room is a mixture of food and the specific sharp chemical smell of lamp components, and also slightly of old fish from somewhere further along the building. Mrs. Dobbs produces supper. Mrs. Dobbs is not a performer. She's the kind of person that every travelling company of any kind, theatrical or otherwise, needs desperately and rarely appreciates properly until they're gone. She's 54, originally from Coventry, married twice and widowed twice, with the specific practical competence of someone who has spent her adult life solving problems before they become emergencies. She cooks on a spirit stove and an arrangement of heating rings she has transported in a canvas bag since approximately 1875, and what she produces from this equipment on a nightly basis would surprise most people who know what she's working with. Tonight it's a mutton stew that has improved significantly since it was cold mutton this afternoon. She has added something, you're not entirely sure what. Some combination of things from the small collection of bottles and packets she keeps in the canvas bag. That has made it into a legitimate meal. There's bread, there's cheese, there's tea. You sit in the chair that is your chair, which is a Windsor chair, with the legs extended by approximately 4 inches by means of blocks of wood that Mr. Crane had fitted when it became clear that watching you eat off a table at knee height was undermining the dignity of the operation. Dmitri sits across from you. Dmitri is the strong man. He is from somewhere in Eastern Europe. He says Russia, but Grace, who has looked into it, thinks it might be Serbia or possibly Poland, and Dmitri's attitude to this inquiry is the specific shrug of a man who has been performing under a Russian identity for long enough that the origins of the identity have become somewhat less important than its utility. He is 28, enormously built, with a neck like a tree trunk and hands that can, without apparent effort, bend a horseshoe flat. He is kind and quiet and speaks English in a careful, thoughtful way that suggests he's translating in his head, choosing each word individually, and sometimes coming to conclusions that are better than what you'd have said if you weren't thinking about it. He puts a piece of bread in the stew and looks at it. Good show tonight, he says. Good show, you agree. This is the standard opening of every post-show conversation. It establishes that the show happened, that it was good enough not to require discussion, and that whatever comes next is free to be about something else. Man in the audience, Dmitri says. Grey coat, kept writing in a notebook. You remember him. 3rd row, slightly to the left, a thin man who watched everything with the specific attention of someone who is seeing things for a purpose rather than for pleasure. Journalist maybe, you say. Dmitri shakes his head. Too quiet for a journalist. Journalists ask questions. This one only watched. Doctor? Dmitri considers this. Maybe. Or one of the reformers. The reformers. You've heard about the reformers. People, some of them politicians, some of them clergymen, some of them just ordinary concerned citizens with time to write letters, who've been making increasingly organised arguments that the freak show industry is exploitative and degrading and ought to be regulated or prohibited. They come to shows sometimes, these reformers, to see what they're arguing about. They watch with the specific expression of people who want to be horrified and are slightly disappointed when the evening turns out to be mostly just boring and a little sad. You don't know how you feel about the reformers. It's complicated. On one hand, you signed a contract. You came here voluntarily. You are an adult human being who made a decision about how to earn money in the specific circumstances of your life. And someone deciding for you that this decision is degrading and ought to be made impossible doesn't feel like liberation. It feels like a different kind of being told what to do. On the other hand, there are people in this company who did not, in any meaningful sense, choose this. There is a boy of 14 named Peter, who is presented as the boy with no bones, because he has a condition that makes his joints hyperextensible in ways that disturb audiences considerably. Peter did not sign a contract. Peter's father signed a contract on Peter's behalf 2 years ago, in exchange for what you understand was a fairly modest sum, and Peter has been travelling with Mr. Crane's company ever since, doing something with his body every evening that makes adults flinch and look away. Peter eats his supper now with the focused efficiency of someone who is very hungry, saying nothing, looking at his food. You think about Peter sometimes at night, not in a way that solves anything, just in the way that certain things stay with you and demand to be thought about even when the thinking doesn't lead anywhere. Mrs. Dobbs refills your tea without being asked, because she has the gift of knowing what people need slightly before they know it themselves. "You should soak your feet tonight," she says to Eliza, not looking up from the stove. "I'm soaking them now." "That's rubbing, not soaking. I've got a bucket with salts if you want it after supper." Eliza says she'll think about it, in a tone that means yes. The room is warm. The gas fixture's storage room improbably has a small fireplace, and someone, probably Mrs. Dobbs, has had a fire going in it since at least 5 o'clock, so the warmth has had time to establish itself in the stone. Outside, through the high small window, you can see nothing but brick wall, but you can hear the city. The specific late evening sound of London in 1882, which is different from the daytime sound and different again from the deep night sound. Right now, it's the sound of people still moving, still doing things, the clatter of late cabs and the shouts of men leaving taverns, and somewhere not too far away, a barrel organ playing something cheerful in a key that doesn't quite match the key it seems to think it's playing in. Albert is reading his newspaper. He's had a newspaper every evening since you joined the company, and you've never been able to figure out how he manages this. The newspaper's always from that day, always the evening edition, always slightly creased in the middle as though it's been folded and carried in a coat pocket. Albert folds his newspaper in thirds lengthwise before reading it, which he says is the correct way to read a newspaper in a crowded room, as it takes up the minimum horizontal space and allows the reader to turn pages without disturbing neighbours. He reads with great attention and speaks only occasionally, usually to say something that makes you understand how much of the surrounding conversation he's been absorbing while apparently reading. "The County Down reformers," he says now, without looking up, "are proposing that all venues presenting human curiosities be required to obtain a medical certificate confirming the voluntary nature of participation before permits will be issued." He turns a page. "They've made this proposal 3 times in the past 4 years. It's gone nowhere each time because nobody can agree on what voluntary means in the context of economic necessity, which is, of course, the central problem." He folds the newspaper and puts it down. "The central problem," he says, looking round the table with his bishop at a garden party expression, "is that when your options are perform as a curiosity or starve, the choice you make cannot be described as truly voluntary, and yet it also cannot be described as coerced, because nobody is forcing the knife. The coercion is the circumstance, not any particular person." He picks up his tea. "I have been making peace with this distinction for 50 years. I have not entirely succeeded, but I have achieved a working accommodation. Good evening." And he returns to his newspaper. This is Albert on a Friday night. Precise, philosophical, slightly melancholy in a way that is also slightly satisfied. Like a man who has thought about something so hard and for so long that the thinking itself has become a kind of comfort. After supper the company disperses. The aquarium doesn't provide lodging. That's not part of the arrangement. What the aquarium provides is the hall, the platforms, the handbills that are distributed weekly across the surrounding streets, the gas for the lamps, and a man named Hutchins who manages the front of house and collects the sixpences and ensures that the flow of people through the exhibits moves at an efficient pace without any individual lingering beyond a reasonable time, his definition of reasonable being approximately 8 minutes, which is enough to form an impression and ask a question, but not enough to start a proper conversation. Lodging is Mr. Crane's concern, and Mr. Crane's approach to lodging is the approach of a man who has been doing this for 30 years, and has developed a network of landladies and boarding houses across every city in England that he visits, ladies who know what he is and what he brings, and have made their peace with it for the sake of the regular income. Not all of them are entirely comfortable with the arrangement, but all of them are comfortable enough with the money. Mrs. Parsons' boarding house on Old Pie Street is a 10-minute walk from the aquarium, through streets that at this hour are not fully dark because nowhere in this part of London is fully dark. There are always gas lamps on the main streets, always windows lit up, always something moving, some evidence of human activity pressing back against the night, but are certainly not well lit, and have enough shadow in the alleys and courts that the walk requires a degree of attention. You know these streets now, you didn't know them 14 months ago. When you first arrived in London in early October of 1880, stepping off the train at Liverpool Street Station, with a bag that contained 2 changes of clothes, a book, a letter from your mother that you'd read on the train, and folded very carefully, and put in the inside pocket of your jacket, and approximately 4 shillings of your own money. The city was simply incomprehensible. Not frightening exactly. You weren't the kind of 20-year-old who frightened easily, partly because you'd had your entire life to develop the specific tolerance for strangeness that comes with being very tall in places where tall people are unusual, which is everywhere, but incomprehensible. Too much, in every direction simultaneously. Liverpool Street Station alone, the noise of it, the steam from the trains condensing on the iron roof above and dropping back down in a fine warm mist, the crowd on the platform moving in a way that seemed to have its own logic, but whose logic you couldn't pass yet, the smell of coal smoke and wet wool, and the particular London smell you'd been told about by everyone who'd been to London, which is a smell that has no single component you can isolate, but is the composite of approximately 800,000 people living very closely together and doing all the things that people do when they live very closely together. You stood on the platform and thought, I am in London. And then someone walked into your elbow and apologized without looking at you and kept walking. And then someone else walked into your other elbow and did not apologize. And you thought, this is going to be a particular kind of education. That was 2 years ago. Now you know Old Pie Street at 11 o'clock on a Friday night. You know the cobblestones that are loose and the ones that are reliable. You know the corner where a man named Finch sells boiled chestnuts from a brazier until midnight. And you know that the chestnuts are excellent and that Finch will talk at length if you let him, about anything. Politics, the weather, the price of coal, a dispute he's been having with a neighbouring chestnut seller about territory that has been ongoing for 2 years and has its own elaborate diplomatic history. You know the alley you should not take after dark, not because anything specific has happened there, but because of something in the quality of the darkness and the specific way the sound of the street changes when you enter it. You know Mrs. Parsons' door, 3rd house from the left, the one with the window boxes that still have the summer geraniums in them even in October, because Mrs. Parsons believes in being optimistic about the geraniums, and you know that the door sticks in the frame and requires a particular sideways pressure at the exact moment of turning the key, and you know that your room is on the ground floor, which Mrs. Parsons arranged specifically for you, because the rooms on the upper floors have ceilings that are 5 feet 10, and walking through a door sideways every time you go to bed is the kind of thing that eventually affects your spirit, even if it doesn't affect your body. The ground floor room has a ceiling of 6 feet 4. You still have to duck slightly to enter, but only slightly, and once inside you can stand almost straight. The bed is a normal bed that ends approximately 18 inches short of your feet when you lie flat, which you've solved with a wooden extension that Mrs. Parsons' husband built before he died, and which she has stored in the shed for occasions requiring it. There's a fireplace that works adequately when you remember to ask the maid to lay it before evening, and when you don't remember it doesn't work at all, and the room is genuinely cold. You remember tonight. The fire is laid. There's a small cheerful activity of flames in the grate when you duck through the door and straighten up into the room, and the warmth of it hits you immediately. The particular satisfaction of warmth after October air. You sit on the edge of the bed and take off your boots. Your boots are a specific thing. They are made to order from a cobbler in Cheapside who makes unusual sizes as a specialty and charges accordingly, and the cost of them comes out of your wages because Mr. Crane's contract, the one you signed by inadequate lamplight in Norwich, specifies that costumes and personal professional equipment are the responsibility of the performer. The boots are leather, good leather, the kind that takes a shine and keeps it, black, with laces that take approximately twice as long to tie and untie as ordinary laces because there is twice as much of them. You put the boots side by side under the window. They look, in the firelight, like two boats moored for the night. Your socks, when you take them off, reveal feet that are cold and slightly damp, which is the condition your feet are in after any extended period of standing on a platform in October. The wooden stage has gaps in it as mentioned, and October air comes up through gaps with the specific commitment of cold air finding an opening. Your feet are large, proportionately large, and they're currently telling you about the evening in the way that feet do. A dull insistence. The kind of ache that isn't quite pain, but is definitely a report from the body about what the body has been asked to do. You press your thumbs into the arch of your right foot. The fire crackles. Outside, London goes on. You lie on the extended bed and look at the ceiling. The ceiling of Mrs. Parsons' ground floor room is plaster, slightly yellowed by years of candle and gas lamp smoke, with a crack that runs from the northeast corner toward the centre that has been there, according to Mrs. Parsons, since at least 1867, and shows no signs of progressing further, which she says with the satisfied tone of someone who has successfully contained a problem rather than solved it. You know this ceiling well. You know it in the morning light when it comes grey through the curtains. You know it in the afternoon when you're resting between the set-up work, the hauling of props and the arrangement of platforms that Mr. Crane's company does themselves before each evening's show, and the show itself. You know it late at night, like now, when your brain is still running at show speed, still processing the evening, still performing in some internal way, even though the performance is technically over. Your brain takes approximately an hour to slow down after a show. This is something you didn't know about yourself before you started this work. The performing version of you, the version that stands on the platform and holds the face and answers the questions, doesn't immediately step aside when the show ends. It lingers, watches, evaluates. Did you hold the face right? Were there moments when something slipped? Were there moments when you were something other than the exhibit? Something that the crowd could sense? Something human and raw and present that broke the seal of the performance? There was one tonight. The man with the notebook. The thin man in the grey coat. He was watching you, not the way the other audience members watched you, not with the wonder and laughter combination that Mr. Crane's promotional work aims for, but with the specific quality of attention that you associate with people who are thinking about something rather than feeling it. He was watching you as though you were a text he was reading and underlining, and you had found yourself for a moment watching him back. That's not supposed to happen. The face is not just cosmetic, it's a boundary. It says to the audience, there is a stage here, and you're on one side of it, and I am on the other, and that arrangement protects both of us. When you watch them back, the arrangement is disturbed. They feel seen. They feel sometimes judged, and they don't like it. But the thin man had met your gaze for a moment and had not flinched and had not looked away, and had not done the thing that most people do when you make eye contact from 7 feet up, which is to become suddenly very interested in the middle distance. He had looked at you as though you looking at him was expected, was in fact part of what he was here to observe. Who was he? You don't know. Albert thinks doctor, possibly, or possibly one of the journalists who've been writing about the reform movement. The Times has run 2 editorials in the past year about the exploitation of physical difference for commercial purposes, carefully worded pieces that say all the right things about human dignity and say almost nothing about the actual conditions of the people they claim to care about. Because nobody from the Times has apparently yet had the idea of simply asking. You could tell them things if they asked. Things that are not the things they would expect to hear. You could tell them, for instance, that the money is real. 12 shillings a week, rising to 14 shillings after 6 months, and to 16 after a year, is more money than most of the people you grew up with earn. It has paid your mother's debts. It has kept your sisters in school. It has allowed your family to stay in the farmhouse rather than moving into the smaller, cheaper accommodation that was the alternative. This is a real thing. This is not a small thing. You could tell them that Mrs. Dobbs's cooking is better than anything you ate in the first 18 years of your life. You could tell them that the city is extraordinary, that travelling it, London especially, but all of them, Birmingham, Manchester, Sheffield, the coastal towns in summer, has given you something you didn't have before and couldn't have obtained any other way. A sense of the actual size of the world, a sense of how many different ways there are to be a person, a sense that Holt, Norfolk, which you loved and still love, is one small dot on a map that contains an enormous and various number of other dots. You could tell them that Albert, who has done this for 50 years, is the most intelligent person you have ever met. You could tell them about the other things. The contract clause that allows Mr. Crane to dock your wages for any performance he deems inadequate. The definition of adequate being his exclusive determination. The fact that you have not in 14 months been docked, but the possibility hangs over every show like a weather that might change. The fact that you're not allowed to discuss your wages with other performers, which is in the contract and which everyone ignores, which means Mr. Crane presumably knows about the ignoring and permits it as a safety valve for a rule that exists mainly to stop the performers from organising. The fact that the contract also includes a clause about Mr. Crane retaining promotional rights to your image, which means the photographs of you that are sold in the lobby and reproduced in promotional materials and occasionally printed in newspapers are producing income that flows to Mr. Crane and not to you. The photographs. That's worth explaining. In 1882, having your photograph taken is not the casual thing it will become. It is still an event, still requires equipment and a studio and a significant holding, still, for a significant period of time, still costs money. But the technology has reached the point where a photograph can be reproduced inexpensively as a carte de visite, a card the size of a playing card with your image on it, and these cards are sold. They are sold in the lobbies of venues, in print shops, in tobacconist shops near venues during runs, at a penny each or 3 for 2pence. Your carte de visite shows you standing in front of a painted backdrop that depicts something vaguely classical. columns, draped fabric, a distant landscape that seems to be Greek or possibly Italian. You are wearing the good jacket that Mr. Crane provided for exactly this purpose, a dark jacket that photographs well and fits you, which is not a small achievement. You are holding a top hat in your right hand. Beside you, positioned carefully, is a woman. She's not identified on the card. She was provided by the photographer's studio for scale purposes, specifically to demonstrate the height differential. She comes to your shoulder, just barely. The photograph was taken on a Monday morning in December of 1880, 3 months after you joined the company, in a studio on Regent Street. You held the pose for 7 minutes while the photographer ducked under his cloth and came back up and adjusted things and went back under and came up again with the look of a man in negotiation with forces beyond his control. You have not seen the photographer since that morning, but you see the photograph constantly. It's in the lobby of the aquarium right now, reproduced large on a promotional card. It's in the lobby of every venue where you've performed. It's on the handbills. You've seen it in shop windows. You've seen it once being used as a bookmark in a novel that a woman on a train was reading, though she did not appear to realize this. You have been told by Mr. Crane that the photograph has sold well. What well means in numbers, Mr. Crane has not specified. What your share of well amounts to, given the contract clause about promotional rights, is nothing. You have learned not to think about the photograph, you think about it anyway. Albert knocked on your door at the boarding house 2 weeks after you arrived, carrying 2 cups of tea that he was balancing with the careful attention of a man navigating a slight height disparity between himself and the cups. You opened the door, and he looked up at you and said, "I thought someone should explain some things. May I come in?" You let him in. He put the cups on the small table by the window, settled himself into the chair, crossed his legs, and looked at you with the episcopal expression. "How old are you?" 20. "How long have you been with Mr. Crane?" 2 weeks. "When does your contract expire?" you told him. 3 years from the signing date, with an option to renew for a further 2 years at terms to be negotiated. Albert nodded. "Standard contract. He offered it to me when I was 9 years old. I was technically a minor, so my father signed it, which raises interesting questions about the legal standing of the initial engagement that I considered pursuing through the courts, approximately 15 years ago, and decided against, partly because of the expense and partly because the moment had passed." He picked up his tea. "Here is what you need to know. Mr. Crane is not a villain. He is a businessman. This is the distinction with practical implications. A villain does harm for reasons that include harm as an end. A businessman does harm as a side effect of pursuing profit, which is categorically different because it means the harm can be mitigated by making the harm expensive. Understood? I think so. If you become a problem, Albert said, you will be managed. If you become expensive, you will be accommodated. The best position to occupy, in Mr. Crane's company, is the position of someone who is so good at the job and so little trouble that the costs of losing you outweigh the costs of keeping you happy." He looked at you over his cup. "You are currently an asset. He paid Cooper to find you and bring you in, which means he has a sunk cost in your recruitment. He has had the boots made. He has had the jacket made. He will invest the photographs and the handbills. In commercial terms, you are a product he has developed, and he will protect his product. That's not comfortable, no, but accurate. I have found that accuracy is more useful than comfort in most circumstances." He finished his tea. "Second thing, the other performers. We're a particular kind of society, small, closed, travelling constantly, under a specific and unusual kind of pressure. The things that divide most societies, class, background, religion, politics, are less important here, partly because everyone's situation is too strange for ordinary categories to apply, and partly because we have to live with each other on trains and in boarding houses and backstage in very small rooms. Extend grace where you can, especially to Peter, the boy. The boy. He does not choose to be here, and does not have the option of leaving, and he knows it, and this knowledge shapes everything about him. He doesn't need pity. He needs to be treated as a person rather than a circumstance. This is not complicated in theory. In practice, it requires remembering it when you're tired and the evening has been long and the company is irritating. He stood up, which required straightening to his full 3 feet, which was always slightly startling, even when you were expecting it. Third thing, your back. You'll be told that the pain is normal and unavoidable. Some of it is. Some of it is not. You should sleep on your back, not your side. You should sit with your feet flat on the floor rather than on a footrest, even when a footrest is offered. You should do certain stretches in the morning, which I will show you, that were taught to me by a physician in Edinburgh who specialised in unusual musculoskeletal presentations. He was not wrong about the stretches. He moved toward the door. One more thing. He turned back. Never, under any circumstances, sign anything that Mr. Crane puts in front of you without reading it twice and showing it to me first. He is a businessman, not a villain, but a businessman with a gift for document drafting. He left. You sat with the 2 teacups and thought about what he'd said. You still think about it. The fire has burned down to coals. The room is warmer now than when you came in, but the warmth is beginning to settle into that steady post-fire temperature that is comfortable now, but will be cold by 3 in the morning, and you've learned to put an extra blanket on the bed before you sleep to account for the gap between the fire's ambition and the night's reality. You reach for the letter on the small table beside the bed. It came on Wednesday. Your mother writes every 2 weeks, in a hand that is careful and slightly formal. The way people write when writing has always been a significant act rather than a casual one. When paper and ink and the time to sit still have always required a certain amount of intention. She writes about your sisters. Clara is learning dressmaking, which she has a talent for, and Miriam is doing well at school and has apparently been singled out by the schoolmistress as particularly able at arithmetic. She writes about the farm, which is managed now by the neighbour's elder son in exchange for a portion of what it produces, an arrangement that is working adequately if not excitedly. She writes about the weather, which in Norfolk in October is not encouraging. She does not write about you. Specifically, she does not write about what you do. This is an arrangement you arrived at by mutual and entirely unspoken agreement after your second letter home, in which you described an evening at the aquarium in enough detail that your mother wrote back with the letter that contained several sentences that were not quite an accusation and not quite a question, but were clearly in the neighbourhood of both. You replied with a letter that was heavy on the financial information, the exact amount sent home, the fact that this would continue, the fact that the working conditions were tolerable and the company decent, and light on the specifics of what the job entailed. She replied with a letter that did not ask the follow-up questions, and that's where it has stayed. She knows you send money, she knows you're in London, she knows at some level what the arrangement is, because people in Holt knew what Cooper was when he came there, knew what it meant when a man started asking round about anyone with unusual physical characteristics, and someone You've never found out who told your mother that Cooper had been asking about you before you told her yourself, but she has chosen so far not to know specifically, and you have chosen to honour that. Clara is learning dressmaking. Miriam is good at arithmetic. You fold the letter back along its original creases and put it under the edge of the extra blanket. Outside, the barrel organ has stopped. The street is quieter now, the late-night quiet of a city that never fully sleeps but does slow down, the activity becoming more spread out, more nocturnal, less the general rush of ordinary life and more the specific purposes of people who are out late for reasons of their own. You close your eyes. The day has been breakfast at 7, which was porridge and toast and the very strong tea that Mrs. Parsons produces from a pot that appears to have been brewing since approximately the Crimean War. Set up at the aquarium from 10 to 12, which involved hauling your platform into position and arranging the backdrop behind it, and testing the gas lamp arrangements with a man from the aquarium's maintenance staff who was not particularly interested in the performers as people, but was very interested in the gas lamp arrangements as a technical problem. An hour's rest. The afternoon showing, 3 to 5, which on Fridays is less crowded than the evening, but tends to attract people who are there with a specific intellectual intention. Students, the occasional journalist, a contingent from a school in Bloomsbury who'd been brought by their teacher as a lesson in natural history, which had given the evening a slightly peculiar quality. More rest. Mrs. Dobbs's cold mutton. The evening show, 6:30 to 10. Supper, the walk home, and now this, the ceiling, the fire coals, the letter. One day. 365 of them have passed since you signed the contract, give or take. 730 until the contract expires, give or take. You're not counting. Not exactly. You're just aware of the number the way you're aware of the weight of your own body when you stand. Not consciously, but as a kind of background fact that shapes how you move through the world. You wake before dawn because you always wake before dawn. This is a habit from the farm, from years of 5:30 mornings that have written themselves into your body's clock in a way that seems permanent, regardless of the time you went to sleep, and regardless of how much your body would prefer to sleep longer. The room is cold. The fire is ash. The cold has come through the window glass and settled into the room in the specific quiet way of cold that has been present for several hours. Not shocking, but pervasive. Everything slightly below the temperature of comfort. The kind of cold that your hands notice first. You find the situation and assess it. Cold room, warm bed, no compelling reason to get up for approximately 2 hours. You pull the extra blanket up and lie still. This is the best part of the day, possibly. The 2 hours between waking and needing to get up. Your brain is running but not yet performing. The city outside is in its quietest phase. The sounds are different. Horses mostly. The early delivery horses, the milk cart, the bread cart. The sound of hooves on cobblestones in the morning air having a different quality than in the afternoon, sharper and more distinct. The city not yet providing the background noise that will absorb individual sounds into its mass. You think. It's what you do with this time. You've always been a thinker, in the specific sense of someone whose mental activity doesn't require any particular input to get going. You can think about almost anything, about anything in your experience or knowledge or speculation, and the thinking itself has a quality of enjoyment that you don't quite know how to explain to people for whom thinking is instrumental, something you do in order to solve a specific problem and then stop. You think about the man with the notebook. You think about Albert's distinction between villains and businessmen. You think about a conversation you had 3 weeks ago with Eliza, backstage at the second Birmingham venue, a Wednesday afternoon when the show had been thin and the energy in the room had been low, and you'd both been sitting in the narrow space behind the platforms waiting for Mr. Crane to finish his post-show accounting and release everyone. "Do you ever tell people?" Eliza had asked. "Tell people what? That you're in a freak show? People who need to know. My mother knows mostly. I mean people you meet, on the street, in shops, normal interaction people. You'd thought about it. I don't usually have to tell them. They can see." "Right, but that's different from telling them the context. When someone looks at you in the street, they just see a very tall man. They don't know you're being paid to be looked at elsewhere." "Does it matter?" Eliza had considered this for a while. She had a way of thinking that you'd noticed. She went quiet and her eyes moved slightly, as though she was reading text she could see that you couldn't. "It matters to me," she said, "because when I don't say it, when I'm just Eliza, just a woman out buying bread, people see the wrong thing. They see the connection with Grace. They don't see me. And when I say it, when I explain, suddenly they see something else. The freak show, the performance. And they still don't see me." She looked at the wall. "I'm not sure there's a context in which people see me." You didn't know what to say to that. You still don't. But you think about it in the early morning, in the 2 hours before you need to get up. You think about it because it touches something that's true for you too, in a different way. Because being 7'1" means that you have never, in your adult life, been seen without the height being the first thing, the defining thing, the thing that organizes everything else about how a person looks at you and what they expect from you and what questions they ask. You existed before the freak show. You will presumably exist after it. But in the freak show, at least, the looking has a context. At least the looking is honest about itself. At least the staring is acknowledged as staring, rather than performed as something else. That thought is not simple. You're not sure it's good, but it's there. Saturday. Saturday is a different machine from Friday. Friday's busy. Friday is the show finding its stride after the midweek lull. But Saturday is the full engine, the reason the gas budget exists, the culmination. You are up at 7. The cold room has become, after the night under the extra blanket, a room with a particular morning temperature that is sustainable if you move quickly. Wash. The basin is cold water from the jug that Mrs. Parsons' girl fills every evening and which has been sitting in the cold room since 8 o'clock the previous night. Cold water in the morning on your face is a shock that you've learned to treat as a feature rather than a problem. It wakes you up with more efficiency than any amount of tea, and efficiency in the morning is useful. Your reflection in the small mirror over the basin is the face that you don't quite recognize as fully your own. Not because it's surprising, you've had this face your entire life, but because it's the face that gets stared at, the face on the carte de visite, the face that is simultaneously you and the property of Mr. Crane's promotional operation. You look at it in the mornings and try to just see it as a face. Sometimes you succeed. Dress. The everyday clothes, not the show jacket. The show jacket lives in a garment bag in the corner and does not leave the garment bag except for shows. The everyday clothes are good quality by the standards of what you could have afforded in Holt, because Mr. Crane has a point about appearances that is separate from and prior to the freak show point. A man your size, dressed badly, reads as threatening. A man your size, dressed well, reads as impressive. Impressive is better for business and better for daily life in a city where the way you navigate the street is shaped by how people respond to you. This is one of the things you've absorbed, the constant management of other people's responses to your size, the way you angle yourself through doorways, not just for the physical navigation, but to reduce the impact on anyone nearby. The way you don't sit in the front row of anything, not churches, not theatres, not the occasional music hall evening that Mr. Crane arranges for the company as a welfare gesture. The way you've learned to hold yourself at an angle in conversation with people of normal height, so that they're not looking vertically up at you but at an angle, which is less comfortable for them but less intimidating. You've been managing the responses since you were 14 and shot up 9 inches in a single year. You've had 8 years of practice. You are good at it. It is exhausting. Breakfast in Mrs. Parsons' dining room. The dining room accommodates a table that seats 8, and on this morning there are 5 of you. Yourself, Albert, Dimitri, a woman named Sasha who you haven't met before, and Mrs. Parsons herself, who does not eat with the guests but sits at the end of the table with a cup of tea and occasionally offers observations. Sasha is new. She joined the company on Thursday, replacing a performer who left, voluntarily, which is either more or less common than you might think depending on the circumstances, after the Birmingham run. Sasha is billed, from what you understand, as the Russian contortionist, a billing that fits her appearance. She's very slight, with the specific physique of someone whose body has been trained from childhood in a particular direction, but not apparently her origins, which are from somewhere in Shropshire. This is fine. The Russian contortionist billing is what Mr. Crane needs for the current configuration of the show. Sasha's real origins are Sasha's private concern. She's eating with the focus of someone who has been travelling and is now eating a real meal, which is a specific quality of attention that anyone who has spent time on the road learns to recognise. She is maybe 25, with dark hair and very precise hands, and she has the quality of being entirely unreadable, not as a performance, but as a natural state, like a cat that has decided to be present in a room without volunteering any information about its purposes. New to the company, you ask? She looks up. Since Thursday, she says. Her voice has no particular accent. This is, you've learned, also cultivated. The accent is another thing that belongs to the performance and not the person. Tom Marsh, I know who you are, she says, without it being unfriendly. Albert told me about everyone. He gave me a full briefing on the train from Birmingham. Very thorough. He used the word diplomatic about you. You look at Albert. Albert is reading his newspaper. He has already obtained a Saturday newspaper, which, given that it is 7:20 in the morning, suggests either that he gets up very early or that he has an arrangement with Mrs. Parsons' girl, and possibly both. Diplomatic, you say. His exact word, Sasha confirms. Is that good? He also said you're the one who can be counted on in a difficult situation. He said this with some specificity. What kind of difficult situation? Albert lowers his newspaper approximately 2 inches. The kind where Mr. Crane is in a mood and somebody needs to either absorb the impact or redirect it, he says. You're large enough to physically change the attention in a room. This is useful. He raises the newspaper. Also, you don't drink, he adds from behind it, which makes you unusual and reliable in approximately equal measure. Dimitri, who drinks moderately and does not consider this a subject for comment, is eating porridge with the focused contentment of a large man who is getting adequate food. Mrs. Parsons from her end of the table. More tea, anyone? Saturday mornings, when there's a show in the evening, are not technically work time. Mr. Crane's contract specifies work hours as the hour before showtime and the duration of the show itself, which means the mornings are yours. In practice, everyone does something. Dimitri does exercises, elaborate ones, in the small courtyard behind the boarding house. You've watched from the window sometimes, the sequence of movements he goes through, the precise and extraordinary strength they demonstrate, done in the methodical way of someone for whom this is maintenance rather than display. Albert reads. Mrs. Dobbs shops, which she approaches with the systematic efficiency of a general preparing for a campaign. Eliza and Grace walk, wherever they are, every morning, which is their version of the morning exercises, a practice that requires them to have developed a walking rhythm between them that is fast and economical, and covers ground in a way that observers sometimes stop to watch, though the twins appear not to notice. You walk too, not with Eliza and Grace, not usually. You walk alone, which is one of the things you learn to love in London. The city as a place for walking through, the city as a text that reveals itself slowly, neighbourhood by neighbourhood, street by street, the layers of it, the way one street can be completely different from the street behind it, in ways that map onto centuries of history and accident and the specific decisions of specific people about what to put where and why. This morning you go south and east, because south and east is the direction you haven't gone recently, and novelty is one of the things you walk for. The streets in this part of London in the early morning have a different quality from the afternoon streets. The businesses that serve the evening trade are closed and shuttered. The businesses that serve the morning trade are fully awake. The bread shops and the milk sellers and the early morning stalls that are the invisible infrastructure of the city's daily life. A woman selling matches from a basket at the corner of a street whose name you don't know, standing so still she looks like she grew there. A man with a cart of vegetables, arranging them with the care of an artist. The smell of bread from a shop whose door is propped open. A warm yeast smell that is one of the consistently good smells of London, and one of the reasons you've developed the habit of noting where the bakeries are in each neighbourhood you spend time in. You duck under the awning of a cheese shop. The awning is at a height that you've learned to check rather than assume, and buy a piece of hard yellow cheese from a woman who looks at your height and says nothing, which is either rare equanimity or has come from working in a shop near the Westminster Aquarium long enough to have seen Mr. Crane's company come through multiple times. You eat the cheese walking. The Thames is 10 minutes south and you go toward it because the river is one of the things about London that consistently offers something. It's never the same twice, never exactly boring, always doing something. The combination of tidal movement and shipping traffic and weather creating a river that is different in the morning from the afternoon, different in rain from sun, different when you're looking at it from a height, from when you're at its edge. At the edge now. The embankment, which was built only 12 years ago on land reclaimed from the river, is one of the modern things about London that coexists uneasily with everything else modern about London in this period. The gas lamps and the sewers and the telegraph and the beginnings of the underground railway. All the infrastructure of the contemporary city laid over, or beside or through the structure of a much older city. So that to walk through London in 1882 is to walk through several centuries simultaneously, a building from Elizabeth's time next to a building from George's time next to a building from last year. The embankment in the morning is gardeners and the occasional early walker and the professional river workers, the men who service the boats and work the wharves, doing their early morning work in the specific way of people who start early because the tide doesn't consult business hours. The river itself this morning is grey-green and choppy, a wind coming from the northeast that has the smell of the North Sea in it, cold and salt and something mineral, and the ships anchored in the stream are moving on their chains with a slow, rhythmic heave that is visible even from here. You stand at the railing and look at the river and think about nothing in particular, which is one of the things the river's good for. A man stops beside you. He's about 50, in a good coat, with the look of someone taking a constitutional before his day begins. He looks up at you, the neck crane, the adjustment, and says, "Fine morning." "Fine morning," you agree. He looks at the river. "Tall," he says after a moment. "Not quite to you, almost to himself." "Yes," you say, "very tall." "Yes." He nods, as though this has resolved something, and walks on. You watch him go. You are never not the height. Everywhere you go, in every context, with every person, the height is the first thing, the present thing, the organising fact. The man at the railing saw a tall person before he saw a person. This will be true tomorrow and next year and in 30 years if you live that long, which people of your stature, according to the Edinburgh physician Albert mentioned, do not always do, because the body's systems were calibrated for a particular scale, and being significantly outside that scale creates stresses that accumulate. The physician said this with the specific neutrality of a scientist, not trying to cause pain, just being accurate. You've made your accommodation with it, or you're making it. The making is ongoing, the river moves, the ships move. Somewhere behind you, London is waking up. You're back at the aquarium by noon for setup. The setup on a Saturday is slightly more elaborate than weekdays because Mr. Crane does a full Saturday evening which runs until 11. And the run to 11 requires more platform lighting than the 9 o'clock runs, which means additional gas lamp arrangements, which means additional time with the maintenance man, whose name is Ellis, and who has the specific disposition of someone who considers his job technical and important, and considers everyone else's job inferior and peripheral, but is too professional to say so directly, which he compensates for by saying it indirectly through the precision with which he treats his own work and the slight impatience with which he treats everyone else's contributions. "The lamp on the east end of your platform," Ellis says, appearing from behind a gas fitting with a wrench. "It's been running low pressure. I've adjusted the feed valve, but you'll want to tell Mr. Crane to have someone look at the main junction on Tuesday." "I'll tell him." "Tell him before Tuesday would be ideal. The junction has been degrading for 3 weeks. If it goes entirely, you'll have your whole east side dark." You will tell Mr. Crane. Mr. Crane will do the thing where he touches his moustache once and says, "Right," in a tone that means he's noted it. And then there's approximately a 60% chance that he'll actually act on it, which you've learned to model as something like acceptable odds in a world where perfect compliance is not available. The platform is clean. The aquarium staff swept last night, which is one of the genuine advantages of a fixed venue over the travelling shows, where the cleaning happens or doesn't depending on whoever is responsible and how tired they are. Your stage is 12 feet by 8, raised 18 inches from the floor, with a step on the front that provides access, though the step requires a certain amount of faith on the part of whoever is ascending as it's slightly uneven. Behind the platform, your backdrop. The backdrop was made 3 years ago before you joined and is showing its age. It's a painted canvas showing something that was originally a Roman or possibly Greek architectural scene. Columns, archways, some landscaping. The painting was competent when new. It is now faded in places and has a tear in the upper right corner that has been repaired with a stitching that doesn't quite match the original colour, giving that corner of Rome or Greece a slightly different character from the rest. You've been looking at this backdrop for 14 months. You know every brush stroke of it. You know the place in the lower left where the painter changed their mind about a shadow and painted over it, and you can see the ghost of the original shadow underneath on certain evenings when the light is at the right angle. You know the column on the right that is slightly thicker at the bottom than at the top, which is technically incorrect for a classical column, but which is what happens when you're painting something large from the floor and have to extrapolate the upper portions from memory. You know that there is a small creature, a cat you think, or possibly a dog, it's been repainted at some point, in the lower right corner that is almost invisible, and that you noticed only on your third week, and which, once noticed, you find impossible not to see every time. This is your office. This is where you spend your professional life. You stand in front of it in the afternoon light from the high windows of the hall and look at it and think, this is mine, in the sense that anything temporary and transient can be said to belong to a person. The stage and the backdrop and the gas lamps and the specific piece of floor at the centre of the platform where you stand. Yours for now. Peter is doing his warm-up in the back corridor when you pass through to collect your jacket from the garment bag. Peter's warm-up, for obvious reasons, is not the kind of thing that is easy to watch without a response. He is sitting on the floor with his legs in a position that would, for most people, require emergency medical attention, and he is moving his arms in slow circles that imply a similar joint situation in the shoulder region, and his face during all of this is entirely blank, not performing blankness but genuinely absent, the face of someone whose body is doing something and whose mind has decided to be elsewhere for the duration. You have learned, following Albert's instruction, to not respond visibly to Peter's warm-up, to treat it as the professional activity it is, to say good evening to Peter the same way you'd say it to any colleague preparing for work. Evening, Pete, you say. Peter completes the arm circle. Evening, he says, 14 years old, 14, from somewhere in the Midlands. You've never been sure exactly where because Peter doesn't talk about it and you haven't asked. He has the look of someone who stopped growing early, not in height, but in face. A boy's face that has the quality of someone who figured out a lot of things sooner than they should have needed to. He reads a great deal. He borrows books from Albert, who seems to consider maintaining a lending library for the company one of his minor administrative responsibilities, and he reads them with the speed and retention of someone who has a lot of time and no other way to fill it than reading. Good crowd tonight, he asks, his body still doing the things his body does. Saturday, always good. He nods. I need to ask you something, he says, and the tone is slightly different. The professional ease replaced by something that requires more effort. Go on. The man with the notebook, the one Dmitri mentioned. He was watching me too. When I looked up, he looked away, but I could see him coming back. He had a way of watching from the side. Do you know who he is? No? Albert thought doctor, maybe, or reformer. He came back today, Peter says. Afternoon show. Different seat but same notebook. That's interesting. Did he talk to anyone? Not that I saw. He stayed for the whole afternoon show. Then I think he went to the front to buy a programme. Could be a journalist doing a story. Or genuinely a medical man. Some of them come in to take notes for papers. Peter finishes the arm circle and begins something else. Something with his spine that you can't quite look at straight on. His voice, when he continues, is level, professional, the voice of someone reporting a fact rather than expressing a feeling. I don't like being watched like that. The audience watching, that's fine, I know what that is. But that kind of watching, the notebook kind, That feels like something different. You think about the thin man in the grey coat, about the quality of his attention. I know what you mean, you say. What should I do? He's 14 years old and is asking you what to do about a situation that is ambiguous and potentially threatening, and where the normal person to ask, a parent, a guardian, someone in authority who has the child's interests at heart, is not available in the way it should be. You are 22 years old and are also, in a different way, in a situation where the normal structures of protection are not available in the usual way. Tell Albert, you say. Albert will know who the man is or be able to find out. Albert knows everyone. This is true. Albert's network of knowledge about the industry, the people in it, the journalists who cover it, the doctors and reformers who circle it, is extensive in a way that seems impossible for one person, until you understand that he's been doing this for 50 years and has been paying attention the entire time. All right, Peter says. He goes back to his warm-up. You get your jacket from the garment bag. The show begins at 6:30. Mr. Crane addresses the company at 6 o'clock, as he does before every evening show. He stands at the head of the back corridor with the company gathered in the space around him, wearing his red coat, moustache waxed to points that are sharper than usual, which either means he's in an exceptionally good mood or extremely nervous, and you've learned to look at his eyes rather than his moustache to distinguish these states. Tonight his eyes are business eyes, focused, calculating the room the way a man calculates a purchase before he commits to it. Full house tonight, he says. We've had strong reviews in the Illustrated from the Tuesday show, and I've seen at least 4 different programmes from tonight circulating in the public bars of Tothill Street and the surrounding area. The interest is there. The job tonight is to convert interest into experience, not spectacle. Experience. He looks around the corridor. His gaze passes over you, over Eliza and Grace, who are standing with the familiar slight lean that accommodates both of them, over Dmitri, who is already completely inside his performance mode, a stillness about him that is its own kind of enormousness, over Albert, who nods once, barely perceptibly, which from Albert constitutes enthusiastic endorsement, over the others, the woman with the skin condition whose name is Agnes, and whose manner is the specific dignified composure of someone who's been through enough that very little can shake them, the magician who performs in the side room and who is not technically a human curiosity but contributes to the overall programme, the girl who walks the high wire in the main hall, who is extremely young and not technically contracted with Mr. Crane but with her father, who acts as her manager and is probably the least appealing person in the company, over Peter, who is standing with his jacket buttoned and his face already doing the work. Remember, Mr. Crane says, that the people coming through that door are paying for something they cannot get anywhere else. They are paying to see something genuinely, demonstrably true about the world, that it is more various than they imagined. That is not a small thing to sell. Do not treat it as a small thing. He pauses. Also, the east lamp has been running low. Ella says it's a valve issue. If it goes dark, ignore it. If it goes dark and starts making a sound, remove yourself from the platform immediately and come find me. We are not dying for the gas lamp. There are limits. Something very close to a laugh from the corridor. The specific sound of a group of people releasing a small amount of collective tension. Right, Mr. Crane says. 30 minutes. He walks away toward the front of house. Albert falls into step beside you as the company disperses. The man with the notebook, he says, quietly, without preamble. His name is Edwin Dallow. He writes for a medical publication, The Lancet, occasionally, but also for a smaller journal called the Journal of Physical Anthropology that most people haven't heard of. He's interested in what he calls the taxonomy of physical variation. He's written about several performers in Mr. Crane's circuit and others, usually without their knowledge or consent. He is not, as far as I have been able to establish, malicious. He is, however, entirely focused on the scientific interest of his subjects, which means his interest in the people themselves is mediated entirely through the interest in their bodies. He looks up at you. He will almost certainly attempt to approach you for a conversation. The advice, for what it's worth, you can speak to him or not as you choose. You don't owe him an interview, but if you do speak to him, be aware that anything you say may appear in print, in a publication that would describe you as a specimen. Specimen. His word, not mine. He used it in the last piece he wrote, about a man in Birmingham with a condition affecting his bone density. The man had refused to be interviewed. Dallow wrote about him anyway, from observation. Can he do that? He can observe a public show and write about what he observed. The contract you signed with Mr. Crane does not include any protections against journalistic description, which is something I flagged when you first showed me the contract, but which Mr. Crane was not willing to address because such protections would also prevent positive journalistic coverage. You think about the thin man's notebook. You think about what he might have written. A tall man in Norfolk provenance, 7 feet 1 inch, physical proportions consistent with, family history of, medical significance of, prognosis for. You are a career and a health condition and a family story and a person who eats breakfast and walks to the river in the morning. Edwin Dallow will write about 3 of those things. Tell Peter, you say, about who he is. I've told Peter, Albert says. Peter's response was more colourful than mine. The show. This is the part that is hard to describe accurately to someone who hasn't stood on a lit stage and been looked at, because it has components that resist description. The quality of attention from 200 people simultaneously. The specific kind of energy that a full house generates. The way the gas lamps create a boundary between stage and audience that is physical as well as psychological. The crowd comes in waves. Mr. Hutchins manages the flow, as always, timing the movements of each group of visitors so that each platform gets approximately the right amount of traffic. The whole operation running with an efficiency that is more impressive up close than the audience would ever guess, since from their side it looks like organic movement, like people simply gravitating to what interests them, rather than a managed system with explicit timing. You stand, you hold the face. The first group of the evening is a mixed party, families with children, a couple of young men who are clearly here as an outing rather than out of any particular interest in human curiosity, 3 women of middle age who are together and whose specific combination of fascination and discomfort suggests they are here for improving purposes. The children are always the most directly engaging of any audience. Adults have learned to filter their reactions through layers of social appropriateness. They will stare, but they will look away when they realize they're staring. They will want to touch, but won't touch, because touching is not done. Children have not yet fully internalized these filters. A girl of about 8 looks at you with her mouth open and then turns to her mother and says clearly, "He's really very tall, Mama." "Yes, dear." "But also his hands are very large." "Yes, dear." "Do you think everything is proportionally large?" The mother's face does something complicated. "We don't ask questions like that," she says. "You keep the face. Inside the face, something that is not quite amusement. The 8-year-old's question is in fact medically and biologically interesting. The answer is that proportional growth in cases like yours is variable and somewhat complex, and that everything is both a more specific question than the child knows, and also one that has been asked by doctors and not always answered with complete accuracy. But you don't say any of this. You say, everything's the same shape, just bigger. The girl nods. Like a big loaf of bread, she says, apparently satisfied. Exactly like that, you say. She takes her mother's hand and they move on. Halfway through the evening, the east lamp goes dark. Not dramatically, not with a sound. Just one moment there is light from the east side of the platform and the next moment there isn't. Ellis was right about the valve. The shadow it creates on the platform is significant. Your backdrop, which relied on the east lamp for the lighting of its right side, now has a column of darkness covering approximately a third of its width, which gives the already aging classical scene an additional layer of antiquity that might charitably be described as atmospheric, and less charitably as simply broken. You don't move. You stay in the position you were in when the lamp went dark, which is standing centre stage with your hands at your sides. The audience currently on the platform, about 12 people, look at the dark lamp, look at you, and then, following the logic of the evening, look back at you. The face holds. The platform still has its main lighting from the front. You are still visible. The show continues. Mr. Crane materializes at the edge of the platform approximately 90 seconds after the lamp goes dark. You don't see him come. You're facing the audience, but you're aware of him the way you're always aware of Mr. Crane in your vicinity, which is partly the red coat being visible in peripheral vision, and partly something else, some quality of attention that his presence generates. He looks at the dark lamp. He looks at you. He touches his moustache once, then he moves away. 6 minutes later, the lamp comes back on. Ellis apparently has a spare valve. The show continues. This is the thing about a show. It is fundamentally more resilient than you'd expect. Things go wrong. The lamp goes dark. A performer has a difficult crowd interaction. The timing is off because of something that happened in the morning. And the show continues. Not because of any particular bravery or professionalism, though these are present, but because the audience is present. And the audience's presence creates a momentum that makes stopping feel like the more difficult option than continuing. You know this about shows now the way you know the streets round Old Pie Street. In the beginning, the show felt fragile. Every moment felt like it could be the moment when the whole thing came apart, when the face slipped, or the crowd turned hostile, or something happened that exposed the artificiality of it. Now it feels like the most natural thing. Not natural in the sense of easy, but natural in the sense of a thing that has its own logic, and follows that logic with, or without, your conscious management. You stand. The crowd comes and goes. The lamp is back. The backdrop is the same backdrop. In the 9th group of the evening, Edwin Dallow appears. You recognise him from Eliza's description and your own partial sighting the previous evening. He is thin, grey-coated with the notebook under his arm rather than open, which is different from yesterday. He is alone. He positions himself at the back of the small crowd looking at your platform, which gives him a view of you and also a view of how the audience interacts with you. And he does the thing that Albert described, watching from the side, using a kind of peripheral vision that technically means he isn't staring directly but captures the same information. You watch him back, openly. This is a decision you've made between last night and this moment, lying in the cold room in the early morning. If Dallow is here to observe, he will observe. You cannot stop this within the current legal and contractual reality. but you can observe him observing you, which changes the nature of the observation, makes it bilateral rather than unidirectional, which is at minimum a statement of something. He notices. He looks up. For a moment you are both looking at each other. He's approximately 40, with the specific kind of thin face that suggests someone who regularly forgets to eat because other things are more interesting. His eyes are very dark. His expression when he meets yours is not guilty. He clearly does not feel he's doing anything wrong, but it shifts slightly, recalibrates, in the way that faces do when something unexpected happens. He nods. You hold the face. He takes out his notebook and writes something. He stays for approximately 15 minutes, longer than the Hutchins standard, which means either Hutchins didn't notice or chose not to intervene. And then he leaves, moving back into the flow of the crowd toward the next exhibit. He doesn't look back. You look at the space where he was. You think about what he wrote. The show ends at 11. Saturday, the extra hour. You step down from the platform with the gratitude of a body that has been asked to do something for 4.5 hours and is now being informed it can stop. The gratitude is physical. It moves from your feet upward. A warming down sensation. The specific relief of weight redistributed, of joints and muscles released from the particular demands of standing still for extended periods. The post-show ritual, roll shoulders, bend at the waist, slowly, carefully, the lower back making its usual observations about the evening. Straighten, roll shoulders again. Walk slowly to the back corridor. Drink water. Mrs. Dobbs has left a jug of water with a cup beside it in the back corridor because she understands the physiology of performing better than most physicians. Eliza is sitting on the crate again, boots off, same as every night. The eternal condition of Eliza after a Saturday show. He came back, she says. Dallow. I know. He watched me for 1/4 hour. He watched all of us. He was doing circuits. I think he did every exhibit at least twice. Did he approach anyone? Agnes. She told him to leave her alone, and he did, but he wrote something in his notebook right after. Agnes. Agnes's condition, the skin that the program describes as elephant-like, which is a simplification of a medical reality that has a proper name that Mr. Crane's promotion team doesn't use because they find the proper name less compelling than the elephant comparison, is something that has been written about before in medical publications without her consent or input. She has a specific position on the subject of being written about, a position she has articulated to the company on several occasions with the directness of someone who has thought about it enough that there's no performance in the expressing of it. She doesn't need me to fight any battles for her, you say. No, Eliza agrees. But you could ask Albert to make inquiries about whether Dallow's publication has any editorial standards about consent for the piece he's clearly going to write. Albert's already on it. I know. I'm just saying what I'd like to happen. She begins the foot rubbing. Grace thinks we should let him interview us, she says. She thinks if he's going to write something, it might as well include what we actually think. What do you think? I think Grace is usually right about these things, and I find it extremely annoying. You sit on your bench, the bench that is the right height. The fire in the storage room is going, Mrs. Dobbs having arranged it while you are all performing, and the warmth is already established. Outside, London is doing its post-theatre and pub movement, the specific Saturday late-night traffic of people with intentions that range from very simple to considerably complex. Supper is better on Saturdays. Mrs. Dobbs has had more time to prepare or chooses to invest more in the Saturday meal. And tonight there is a proper stew with actual identifiable components. The mutton again, but also carrots and potatoes, and what appears to be a small quantity of pearl barley. And the bread is fresh, brought in this afternoon from the bakery that Mrs. Dobbs uses when they're in this part of London, and the tea is strong and hot. Dimitri is in the kind of post-show mood that expresses itself as contentment and silence. He eats slowly, looking at nothing in particular, occasionally nodding at something in his own thoughts. Peter eats quickly, the way he always eats, and then asks if anyone has a book he can borrow. Albert produces one from somewhere. It seems to materialize from within the newspaper, which defies physical logic, but has happened often enough that nobody questions it. A novel of some kind. Peter takes it with the concentrated interest of a person for whom a book is not an entertainment but a necessity. Sasha, new Sasha, eats with the same focused efficiency as at breakfast. She watches the room, not obtrusively, but with the quality of someone mapping a new territory. When she speaks, which isn't often, she says things that are direct and specific and slightly unexpected. The high-wire girl, she says now, her father. The table goes slightly quiet. Her father is the person previously described as the least appealing member of the company. His name is Morris. He is the girl's manager, which in practice means he has negotiated her contract with Mr. Crane on her behalf, and receives the majority of her wages, which flows to him directly, and is then distributed to her in an amount that has never been specified to anyone outside that arrangement. The girl's name is Nell. She's 16. She walks a high wire strung 12 feet above the floor of the aquarium at 8 o'clock every Saturday, which she does with a grace that would be beautiful under any circumstances, and which is particularly affecting under these specific circumstances, which are the circumstances of knowing what you know about the arrangement that produced her. "What about him?" Albert says carefully. "He hit her," Sasha says. "This afternoon in the back corridor. I was in the storage room and didn't see it directly, but I heard it. And when I came out, she was touching her face in a way that told me what it was." The table is completely quiet. "Did she say anything?" Albert asks. "She said she walked into a door. She said it the way you say something you've been told to say." Albert puts down his newspaper. This is significant. Albert putting down his newspaper at supper time is the equivalent, in the Albert register of emotional expression, of another person standing up from the table and beginning to pace. "This has been a concern," he says, "for some time. It has been difficult to address because Nell's contract is with Morris, not Mr. Crane. And Mr. Crane's position is that what happens between a performer and her manager is not his business." "Is he wrong?" Dimitri says. "Legally, in 1882, he's probably right. Morally, no." "What happens if we tell Mr. Crane?" you ask. "He will do the thing where he touches his moustache," Albert says, "and say something to Morris about the importance of the performers being in condition to perform, framing it entirely as a business concern, which will communicate the message without requiring Mr. Crane to take any action that could be legally complicated." "Is that enough?" Albert is quiet for a moment. "It is probably not enough, but it is what is available." He picks up his newspaper. "I will speak to Mr. Crane on Monday," he says. "In the meantime, if Sasha or anyone else sees or hears anything further, I want to know immediately." He begins reading. The table restarts its conversation. Smaller, quieter. Mrs. Dobbs refills the tea. You look at the fire. You're thinking about Nell, who walks a wire 12 feet in the air with perfect grace at 8 o'clock on Saturdays, and who walked into a door this afternoon in a way that she would not, under any circumstances, describe more accurately than that. This is another thing that is hard to hold alongside the other things you know. The wonder of the show, and there is genuine wonder in it. You know this. You've seen it in audiences' faces on evenings when something about the collective attention of the room becomes something larger than the individual performers or their individual conditions. Alongside the fact of Morris in the back corridor, the city that is remarkable and beautiful from the embankment in the morning, alongside the city that is cold and poorly lit in October, and harder on the people without money and protection than anyone with money and protection tends to notice. You know both of these cities, you live in both of them simultaneously. This is what it is here. Sunday. The aquarium is closed on Sundays as agreed. You sleep until 8, which is the closest thing to a lie-in that your body's alarm clock permits. You eat breakfast alone. Albert is apparently elsewhere on Sunday mornings, a mystery you've never resolved. Dimitri goes to a church somewhere east. Mrs. Parsons and her girl are in the kitchen, preparing something that smells of roasting meat for the afternoon. You eat porridge and toast and 2 cups of tea, and read the newspaper that Mrs. Parsons provides, which is yesterday's Saturday edition, but is still informative enough. The newspaper has an advertisement. You see it on the inside front page between an advertisement for a tonic of some kind and an advertisement for a shoe manufacturer. It is a reproduction of your photograph, the Roman backdrop, the top hat, the woman from the photographer's studio beside you, your name, your billing, the Westminster Aquarium, this week only, Monday through Saturday, children half price on Wednesdays. You look at your own photograph in Mrs. Parsons' dining room on a Sunday morning. The photograph version of you is still and formal and two-dimensional. It doesn't capture the particular quality of being in a room with you, which you know about only because people describe it. The way spatial relations in the room shift, the way the ceiling suddenly feels lower, the recalibration. The photograph makes you a fact that can be reproduced and distributed and sold. You put the newspaper down, you put on your coat and go out. Sunday London is a different city. The law says no commerce. The practice says limited commerce, commerce of a certain character that can be presented as not quite commerce, or commerce that happens to occur on the street in a way that the specific application of the law to it would require more enforcement energy than it's worth. But the character of the streets changes. More families, more purposeful walking, people going to and from church, walking in the specific way that Sunday morning walking has, slower, better dressed, the particular combination of propriety and leisure that the day demands. You walk without a specific destination, which is one of the best kinds of walking. You end up in St. James's Park, which is open on Sundays, and on Sundays fulfills its function as one of the city's great pressure release valves. The green space in the middle of the density, the place where the built city releases itself for a moment into something looser and more breathable. The park in October has the quality of a room after the summer furniture has been put away. Still functional, still beautiful in the clean bones way, but with the absence of the summer warmth that made it festive. The trees are doing their October thing, the leaves in the process of the colour change that is their annual advertisement for the reality of seasons. The specific yellow and amber of London plane trees in autumn, which is one of the genuinely beautiful things about this city in this month. You walk the path around the lake. The lake has birds, waterfowl, various species, doing the lakebird activities of dabbling and floating and occasionally having what appears to be a dispute over territory. The pelicans are here, the famous ones, descendants of the pelicans that have been in this park since the 17th century, large improbable birds that look like errors of scale, in the same way that you look, to some people, like an error of scale. You consider the pelicans for a moment. They're perfectly normal from their own perspective. Someone says, "Mr. Marsh." You turn. Edwin Dallow is standing on the path behind you, holding his hat against the wind and looking like he's been following you for some time. The grey coat. No notebook visible, though that proves nothing. You look at him. Not with surprise exactly, because somewhere between last night and this morning you had known this would happen. Not with hostility, though the conversation with Albert is present in your mind. With something that is closer to assessment. "Mr. Dallow," you say. His expression shifts again. That same recalibration you saw from the stage. "You know who I am," he says. "Not difficult. You've been watching us for 2 evenings. I apologize if my presence was intrusive." "It wasn't intrusive," you say. "The show is public. You're entitled to watch. I'd like to speak with you if you're willing, professionally, as a journalist. Or a researcher, I suppose, is more accurate." He has a quality of directness that, despite everything Albert told you, you find yourself not quite disliking. He is not performing openness. He is simply not pretending the interaction is casual. "I know what you are," you say. "Albert Fry told me. He said you write about performers without always asking." Dallow is quiet for a moment. "I've written about cases where the subjects declined to participate. I believe the public record is served by accurate description, and that the refusal of a subject to participate doesn't require the elimination of all information. Even if they are not the subject's information to give." He looks at you with slightly more attention. "That's a more sophisticated argument than I was expecting," he says. "Not as an insult, as a genuine observation." "You were expecting what exactly?" He is quiet again, longer this time. "I'll be honest," he says, which is either true or a rhetorical maneuver that resembles honesty. "I expected someone who would be either aggressive or eager to talk. The aggressive ones defend against the writing. The eager ones provide me with material. You're doing neither." "What am I doing?" "Thinking about it," Dallow says, "which is unusual. The pelicans have moved to the centre of the lake and are doing something involving fish that requires more space than the near shore provides. I'll talk to you, you say, on conditions." "What conditions?" "You read what you're going to write to me before it goes to the journal. Not to change it if you don't want, but so that I know what it says. And you talk to Peter the same way, with the same offer. And Agnes, if she agrees." Dallow considers this. "The first condition I can agree to. The others depend on whether they're willing to talk." "That's their decision, yes. But you make the offer." He puts out his hand. You shake it. Your hand around his is the size difference that always exists. Your hand encloses his rather than meeting it on equal terms. You've learned not to think about this, but you do think about it. "Next Sunday," he says. "Here," you say, 10 o'clock. He nods, replaces his hat against the wind, and goes back down the path, the grey coat getting smaller. You walk on around the lake. The pelicans complete their fish operation and settle back to their float. The trees drop leaves at the wind's suggestion. The city hums behind the park's green edge. You think about what you'll say. You think about what you won't say. The line between those two territories is the thing you've been learning to locate ever since Cooper put the paper on the table in Norwich, and you signed it in the inadequate light. The week after the aquarium run is a transit week. Mr. Crane's company leaves London on Tuesday morning, bound for Sheffield, where they're contracted to perform at a music hall for 10 days. Sheffield is a city you know slightly, having been there once in the summer run of the previous year. It is a city that smells of steel and coal, and has a working population that approaches the shows with a specific quality of attention, direct, practical, less interested in the theatrical framing that Mr. Crane provides, and more interested in the immediate reality of what they're looking at. Sheffield audiences are harder than London audiences in the specific sense of taking more effort to engage. But when they engage, the engagement is complete. No ironic distance. No the educated onlooker effect. They look at you and they believe what they see, and that belief, which is after all the thing you're there to create, feels more substantial than London's version of it. But first, the journey. You leave Mrs. Parsons' boarding house on Tuesday at 7 in the morning with a bag that contains your life in its portable form. The 2 changes of clothes, the book, you've acquired several since arriving in London, and your selection process for which ones travel with you has become a considered practice. You currently have 2 novels and a book about geology that you bought second-hand from a barrow on the Strand for a penny. The boots in their bag, the show jacket in its garment bag, the letter from your mother in its inside pocket where it lives, the garment bag you carry, for obvious reasons, over one shoulder. The bag is long, the jacket is long, and it requires a particular angle to navigate station concourses and carriage entrances without hitting anything. Paddington Station on a Tuesday morning is a specific experience. The station is new in the architectural sense. Brunel's original building was rebuilt, the broad gauge replaced by standard gauge, the whole thing in the process of becoming more itself with each passing year, which is what happens with great buildings when they're used for the purposes they were designed for. The roof, the great arched iron and glass roof that Brunel designed, holds the morning light in a way that is genuinely beautiful. The glass panes filtering the October sun into something softer and more diffuse that falls on the platforms and the steam and the people moving between them. The steam this morning is extraordinary. Several trains have arrived and departed in the past hour, and the residual steam hangs in the station air, mixing with the coal smoke and the morning cold, creating a warm fog at eye level that everything moves through. The porters with their trolleys, the businessmen with their briefcases, the families with too much luggage, the occasional dog on a leash pulling in the direction of the trains, with the specific enthusiasm of an animal who has decided trains are the most interesting development of the century. The company travels together, which in practice means everyone is on the same train but occupying different carriages according to the booking arrangements that Mr. Crane's company operates. Mr. Crane travels first class. This is a business expense he doesn't question. Albert travels first class too, which is an accommodation Mr. Crane made early and has maintained, and which is not in anyone's contract but has the force of established practice. Everyone else travels second. Second class on the Midland Railway in 1882 is better than it was 20 years ago, and not as good as first class and adequate in a way that adequacy usually is, which is to say functional, not comfortable in the way that comfort describes a thing designed with comfort in mind, but not uncomfortable in the way that discomfort describes a thing designed without any consideration for the person using it. Your specific challenge with second-class carriages is dimensional. These seats are of normal width and normal depth, but the space above the seat, between the cushion and the ceiling, is calculated for an average head height. Your head is approximately a foot above average. The roof of the carriage sits at 6 feet 2. You clear it by an inch. You learn to slump, not dramatically, the back protests dramatically, but enough to give yourself the margin that makes the difference between travelling in manageable discomfort and travelling in escalating discomfort. which is the specific calculus of this journey and every journey on the circuit. Dimitri's beside you. His space challenge is horizontal rather than vertical. He's not tall, but he is extraordinarily wide in the shoulder, a breadth that is the physical product of 20 years of strength training, and that, in a second-class carriage, requires a negotiated relationship with the seat back. He resolves this by sitting slightly angled, which means his left shoulder is in your space and your right elbow is in his, a compromise that has been established over multiple journeys and which they have both stopped noticing. Sasha is across from you. She travels with a small case and a book and the ability to become completely still in a way that is either meditative or simply the efficiency of someone who has learned to use available time. She reads for the first part of the journey and then apparently sleeps, sitting upright, with a quality of stillness that makes you wonder, looking at her, if she's actually asleep or simply doing the performance of sleep. Peter is in the same carriage, one seat along next to the window. He watches the world pass with the specific attention of someone who has not been able to look at this much uncontrolled nature very often. The fields and hills and river valleys of the English Midlands going past the window with an insistence that is almost aggressive after the urban density of London. He turns the pages of Albert's novel occasionally, but mostly watches the window. The train runs north, through the October countryside, through the specific English landscape of this part of the country. The canal beside the rail line at intervals, the farmhouses with their October fields brown and ploughed and waiting, the occasional industrial intrusion as they pass through smaller towns, the churches and the church towers that are the visual vocabulary of every English landscape, regardless of whatever else is happening. You look out the window too. The thing about travelling, and this is something you have absorbed over 14 months of the circuit, absorbed in a way that has become part of how you move through the world, is that you are never not in the middle of a specific place with a specific history and a specific present reality. The field outside the window of a train in the English Midlands in October 1882 is a specific field, not a generic countryside. Someone farms it. The decisions that shaped its current form were made over centuries by specific people in specific circumstances. The church tower visible in the middle distance marks the location of a community that has been there since before the conquest. People who've been living in relationship with this particular arrangement of land and weather for 1,000 years, and whose lives are as real and particular as your own. This is something Albert said to you once, on a train somewhere between Manchester and Leeds, that the great error of the person who has only experienced one life is to believe that their particular life has a claim on reality that other lives don't. The farmer in the Midlands field is as real as the audience in the Westminster Aquarium. Mr. Crane in first class is as real as Peter in second. Edwin Dallow with his notebook is as real as Agnes telling him to leave her alone. Everything is equally real, Albert said, and this is the most disturbing fact about the world once you absorb it. You're still absorbing it. Sheffield. The music hall is on a street that runs steeply downhill from a crossroads marked by a large stone building that appears to be a bank and a pub that has been there since before the stone building and has seen everything. The hall itself is substantial. Not the aquarium, but not the travelling tent setups you've done at fairs either. A proper fixed venue with a proper stage and proper gaslighting and a proper back corridor. The landlady here is Mrs. Fletcher, who is nothing like Mrs. Parsons. Mrs. Parsons is equable and accommodating, and treats the company with the professional warmth of a woman who has been doing this long enough to have lost any particular feeling about it beyond the commercial. Mrs. Fletcher is interested. She asks questions. She has strong opinions about the show industry in general and Mr. Crane's operation in particular, which she holds confidently and shares freely, and which are not always wrong. "The boy," she says on the first evening, watching Peter eat supper with the fixed quality of someone noting something for follow-up. "How long has he been with you?" 2 years, you say. "He should be in school." "I know." Mrs. Fletcher looks at you with the specific expression of a woman who has decided someone is worth speaking plainly to. You can't do anything about it. Not immediately. Albert is making inquiries about the legal situation. "Albert Fry. I know Albert Fry. Good man, careful man." She pours tea. "Tell him to be less careful about this one. There are people in Sheffield who'd be interested in the situation. Not reformers. Practical people." You look at her. "What kind of practical people?" "The kind who can make things uncomfortable for men who make a living off children," she says simply, and goes back to the kitchen. The Sheffield run is 10 days, which is different from the London run in its particular rhythms. London is always there. You can always find a reason to go out, always find something new, always sustain the forward motion that keeps you from spending too much time in the specific internal landscape of the boarding house room and what it contains. Sheffield is smaller, more contained. The streets near the hall are known within 2 days. The bakeries are located. The river, the Don, brown and industrial, nothing like the Thames in its breadth or historical weight, but doing its own thing with confidence, is identified and visited. On the 3rd day, something happens that is not in the normal run of things. Mr. Crane collects you from the boarding house in the morning, not during set-up, not before a show, but in the morning, which is unprecedented. Mr. Crane's relationship with morning being mediated by the whisky he drinks on Sunday afternoons, and the consequences thereof on Monday and Tuesday, and says that there is a man who wants to meet you, not see you, meet you. The distinction, in this context, is significant. "Who?" you ask. "A physician," Mr. Crane says, "Dr. George Ellis of Sheffield Royal Infirmary. He has a specific interest in cases of," he searches for a word, "significant stature, legitimate medical interest, published work." You think about Edwin Dallow and his notebook. What does he want? To examine you clinically. He's offered to pay, which I consider an indication of genuine interest rather than mere curiosity. He's also expressed an interest in the question of whether any therapeutic approaches might be available for the moustache, the difficulties that can accompany your condition. The difficulties, the back, the knees, the morning assessment of what the body is prepared to do today. The Edinburgh physician Albert mentioned, who said what he said with clinical neutrality. The knowledge, growing in you like a slow frost, that your body is a thing with an architecture not designed for longevity in the way you're using it. What kind of examination, you ask? Standard clinical, he said. Measurements, observation, a conversation about your history and symptoms. He's examined several persons of your general condition, and has published 2 papers in the Lancet about the anatomical and clinical features. You think about Edwin Dallow's description. Specimen. Does he have any particular agenda? Reform? Publication? Mr. Crane shrugs. He's a physician, Tom. His agenda is medical. Those aren't always different things. Mr. Crane looks at you with something that is, if you're reading him correctly, the expression of a man who is slightly surprised by you and is trying to decide how to weight that surprise. You don't have to go, he says. The choice is yours. This is unusual. This is Mr. Crane operating in a register that is outside the normal register, the register where the choices are yours and he is simply making an option available. You think about the Edinburgh physician's prognosis. I'll go, you say. Dr. George Ellis is 50, compact, with the specific kind of energy of a man who moves through the world at a slightly faster pace than the world expects of him. His office at the Royal Infirmary smells of carbolic and paper and a faint overlay of something chemical that you can't identify. The smell of medical work, of the specific environment where bodies are taken apart in the scientific sense. He looks at you when you enter with a kind of direct, unhurried attention that you've learned to distinguish from staring. It's assessment rather than wonder, a professional gaze rather than an audience gaze, the gaze of someone for whom your height is information rather than spectacle. Sit down, Mr. Marsh, he says, gesturing to a chair. The chair has been placed in front of his desk rather than beside it, which puts you at eye level with him when you're seated, which is, you notice this, a choice he's made. He asks about your history. He asks about your family, your height, your parents' heights, your grandparents' heights as far as you know them. He asks about when you started growing and how fast and whether it felt like growth or like something more dramatic. He asks about pain. Not does it hurt in the audience's way, but specifically where, when, what quality, what makes it better, what makes it worse, how it's changed over the past 2 years. He listens, he writes, but the writing is subsidiary to the listening. He writes without looking at the paper, keeping his attention on you, which is different from the Dallow with notebook model of attention. You tell him more than you expected to tell him. You tell him about the back, the specific grinding note it's been making for 6 months. The knees, the way going downstairs requires more thought than going up. The headaches that have started in the past 3 months, which you haven't told anyone, not Mr. Crane and not Mrs. Dobbs and especially not Albert, because telling Albert would produce a careful, calibrated response that would make the headaches more real than they currently feel. Ellis nods at the headaches. It's a pressure concern, he says, not unusual in cases of your height. The circulatory system is managing distances it wasn't designed for. The headaches are the signal, not the problem. The problem is what's causing them, which we should understand better. He conducts the physical examination with the same quality of attention, clinical, complete, unhurried. He measures you precisely at 7 feet 1 1/4 inches. The quarter matters, he says, and records a dozen other measurements with a precision that makes you feel like a building being assessed by an architect. When it's over, he sits back in his chair and looks at you. You've been on the circuit for 14 months, he says. Yes. You're planning to continue for another 2 years under the contract. He's quiet for a moment. I'll be direct, Mr. Marsh. The work you're doing, the standing for extended periods, the travel, the disrupted sleep, the inadequate rest, is not well suited to your specific physiology. Men of your height do not, on the whole, flourish under these conditions. The systems that maintain your body require more rest, targeted exercise, specific kinds of physical support than the circuit generally provides. He looks at his notes. That said, you're not in an emergency situation. The back and the knees are concerns but manageable ones if managed. The headaches are something I want to follow up on, and I'm going to give you some recommendations about sleep position and a series of exercises. He looks up. The ones Mr. Fry taught you. Those are good. The Edinburgh physician who gave them to him is now at Glasgow. Excellent man. You blink. You know Albert's physician. I know Albert, Ellis says. He's been on the circuit for 50 years. Everyone in the medical community who's interested in this area knows Albert Fry. A pause. He told me you were coming to Sheffield, actually. He wrote to me last week. Albert, who's been on the circuit for 50 years, who's been talking to physicians on your behalf, apparently, without telling you, which is either presumptuous or exactly the kind of care that doesn't announce itself, because it knows that announcing itself would make it less effective. He's the most intelligent person I've ever met, you say. He's one of the most intelligent people I've ever met, Ellis says. Also one of the angriest. He just hides it very well. This lands somewhere surprising. Angry about what? Ellis looks at you with the kind of expression that precedes something true. About all of it, he says. About the system that has required him to spend his life on platforms in gaslight, while audiences pay to stare. About the contracts. About the children in those companies. He pauses. About the fact that he had no choice. He has made his peace with it. He has had to make his peace with it. 50 years is a long time to sustain the alternative. But underneath the peace there is an anger that has been there since he was 7 years old. The fire in Ellis's grate pops. Outside, Sheffield goes about its Sheffield business. You sit in the chair that was placed at eye level with a man who's been talking to you for 2 hours as a person, which is, you notice this, you file it, different from the quality of interaction that most of your days provide. What can I do, you say, about the physical situation? Follow the exercises Albert gave you and the additional ones I'm going to write down. Sleep on your back. Eat more than you currently do. I suspect you're managing on less than your size requires. Drink water, and if it's possible within the constraints of your contract, reduce the standing time per session. Mr. Crane won't. He doesn't need to know it's for medical reasons. You can frame it as a show quality issue. Less time standing means more impression per minute. He'll understand that framing. You look at him. He looks back. I've been around the circuit for a long time too, he says. In a different capacity, but I know how these conversations work. He writes the exercises on a card and gives it to you. He gives you a second card with his address and the address of a colleague in London, a Dr. Whitmore at St. Bartholomew's, whom he says you should visit when you're back in London. And, he says, standing as you stand, for what it's worth, the work you're doing requires a kind of courage that doesn't get called by that name usually. The courage to be looked at, to be an object of curiosity every evening, and to still be a person in the morning. That's not a small thing. You think about Eliza saying, I'm not sure there's a context in which people see me. I'm still working on the morning part, you say. Ellis smiles. Most of us are. The Sheffield run continues. Mrs. Fletcher, true to her word, appears on the 4th day with a woman named Mrs. Hartley, who is a school administrator in Sheffield and who, Mrs. Fletcher informs you without preamble over the evening supper, has an interest in the situation of young performers on the circuit and a working relationship with a magistrate who has had occasion to think about the relevant statutes. This conversation happens with Peter in the room. Peter, eating his supper with his customary focused efficiency, looks up when Mrs. Hartley begins talking, and the expression on his face goes through several phases in quick succession. Suspicion, the default. Calculation, the analytical layer under the default. Something that is not quite hope, but is what hope looks like in someone who has learned not to use the word, before settling into a careful listening that is the most complete form of attention you've seen from him. Albert is there too. He's put down his newspaper. Mrs. Hartley is a practical woman, as Mrs. Fletcher said. She speaks about things as they are. without the framework of reform rhetoric that makes reformers sometimes easier to dismiss than engage. She talks about what the law says, about what the law doesn't say, about the gap between those two things that is where Peter's situation currently lives. There are avenues, she says. They're not simple. They require time, and they require someone willing to act as the advocate, which is a role that needs to be voluntary and that I'm prepared to consider. She looks at Peter. But the first question is yours, she says. Not mine, not Mr. Fry's, not Mr. Marsh's. Yours. What do you want? Peter is 14 years old and is being asked what he wants by a woman who appears to mean the question, which is, and you can see this in his face, a situation he has not frequently encountered. He looks at his plate. He looks up. I want to go to school, he says. I want a room that's mine. I want to stop doing the thing I do on the stage. A pause. Not because I'm ashamed, but because I didn't choose it. Mrs. Hartley nods. That's very clear, she says. That helps. She and Mrs. Fletcher begin a conversation with Albert that is specific and procedural, and that you can follow but probably don't need to, because Albert is following it with the total attention of a man for whom this is not an abstraction, and Albert following something with total attention is the best indicator that it's being handled well. You eat your supper, you think about what Peter said. I want a room that's mine. You have a room. It's Mrs. Parsons' ground floor room, and the ceiling is 6'4", and the fire doesn't light itself, but it is yours, in the sense that you have a key and a bench at the right height, and a wooden extension for the bed and a crack in the ceiling that you know well. It's not the farm, it's not Holt. It's not the life your mother imagined when she sent you out into the world with a bag and 4 shillings, but it's not nothing. Day 7 of the Sheffield Run. You've been doing the exercises Ellis gave you, morning and evening, in Mrs. Fletcher's yard in the cold, which is exactly the kind of cold that October in Sheffield generates, a cold with steel in it, the smell of the city's industry in the air, a low grey sky that has committed to grey and is not interested in revision. The exercises work. The back is better than it was a week ago, in the specific way that better means when the body's being attended to. Not fixed, not perfect, but acknowledged, which is apparently most of what the body requires. Albert finds you in the yard on the morning of day 7. He has his own cup of tea, which is unusual for Albert in the morning yard. He says, Mrs. Hartley believes there are grounds. She has spoken to her magistrate. There's a question about whether Peter's father can be reached quickly enough, and about what happens to Peter's housing in the interim. I could ask Mrs. Fletcher, you say. I've already asked Mrs. Fletcher, Albert says. She says yes, obviously. She was offended by the question. Then it's a matter of timing and paperwork, which are the things that determine most outcomes in this world, to a greater degree than most people are comfortable acknowledging. He drinks his tea, looks at the cold sky. Mr. Crane will not be happy, he says. Losing Peter disrupts the program. He'll have to find a replacement, and the replacement will not be as accomplished. Is that our problem? Morally, no, Albert says. Practically, we work for Mr. Crane. The distinction is real. Does it change anything? Albert considers. No, he says. Peter's situation is Peter's situation. Our comfort with Mr. Crane is not the relevant factor, he pauses. But it is worth knowing that Mr. Crane will be unpleasant for some weeks after. You should be prepared for that. What will he do? The business with a moustache, extended and at higher frequency, also a general contraction of goodwill. Fewer concessions, tighter interpretations of the contract clauses, A period of proving loyalty by being very easy to manage. He looks at you. He will not dock your wages because he has no contractual grounds, but the mood will be difficult. I can handle the mood, Albert nods. Yes, he says. I rather think you can. He finishes his tea, gives you the cup as though you are the relevant person to return it to the kitchen, and goes inside. You hold the cup in your large cold hands standing in a Sheffield yard in October, and you think about what Albert said. Underneath the peace there is an anger that has been there since he was 7 years old. You think about that. You think about the contracts and the photographs and the calculations of what it costs to be this and what it's worth, the value that is extracted from the fact of your body, the money that flows from you and to you and around you in the complex economy of this circuit. You think about your mother's letter in your inside pocket. Clara is learning dressmaking. Miriam is good at arithmetic. The money you send home every month has made those things possible. The contract that you signed in the inadequate light in Norwich, the photographs sold in the lobby, the evenings on the platform in the gas lamp glow, have made those things possible. You are not sorry you came. You're not sure you're glad. You are still deciding, and the deciding is continuous, and perhaps the decision is never final. And perhaps that's the honest description of how most lives work. Not a single choice, but a series of choices, each made in the light of the ones before, each revised in the light of the ones after, the whole thing arriving at something that is more the result of time than intention. You go inside, you return the cup to the kitchen. Mrs. Fletcher is at the stove. She does not look up. Ellis gave you his card, she says. Yes. He is a good man. He told me your back's better. He told you. We correspond. We've been corresponding about your company's people for 3 years. You look at her. She stirs something on the stove. This is a small world, she says. The circuit. The people who care about the circuit. We talk to each other. Some of us are trying to make things better, slowly, in the ways that are available. It's not heroic. It doesn't make good newspaper copy, but it moves. She looks up. Ellis, Albert Fry, Mrs. Hartley, the magistrate, me. Dallow used to be in the category, but he went too far into the writing about people without asking direction. That door is partially closed. You're trying to change the conditions, you say. When we can. As much as we can. She goes back to the stove. You can help or not help. No obligation. But you're articulate and you're thoughtful, and you carry yourself in a way that makes people want to listen, which is not a small thing when you're talking to magistrates and journalists. You stand in the kitchen. The stove smells of something with onions. What would I need to do? Talk to Dallow for a start. The piece he writes will reach people who might be useful. Make sure it contains what's true, including the parts that are complicated. She adds salt. Tell Ellis what you told me. I asked him, and he said you described the situation of your back and your knees more clearly than most patients describe things. That kind of clear description, in the right publication, helps people make arguments. Which people? The ones making arguments in Parliament about exhibition regulations, the ones trying to close the gap between what the law says and what Peter's situation is. She turns. It's not dramatic, but it's what there is. You think about Albert's phrase, the things that determine most outcomes in this world, timing and paperwork, not the stories people tell about change, the dramatic public moments, but the slow, unspectacular accumulation of information and conversation and connection, and the occasional strategic letter to the right person. All right, you say. Mrs. Fletcher nods and goes back to the stove as if this was the expected outcome, as if you were always going to say yes, and the only variable was when. The run ends. Sheffield becomes a memory of steel smell and cold mornings, and Mrs. Fletcher's excellent cooking, and Mrs. Hartley's conversation with Albert over supper, and the conversation in the kitchen, and a magistrate's letter, arriving on the 8th day that Albert reads and folds and puts in his pocket, without telling anyone what it says except that it says what was hoped. Peter, on the final evening in Sheffield, does his warm-up in the back corridor in the usual way, and then he does his show, and then he eats his supper, and he is quieter than usual, and his face has the quality of someone who is inside a thought that he hasn't finished yet. After supper, he asks Albert something in a low voice that you don't hear, and Albert says something equally quiet in return, and Peter nods once, a nod that contains several things. You don't say anything to him directly. You pass him in the corridor and say, "Good show tonight," the way you always do, and he says "good show," the way he always does, and that is the full content of the exchange, which is exactly the right amount. The train back to London. You have the window seat this time, which means you get to watch the country happen in reverse. The steel smell of Sheffield giving way to the Midlands again, the fields and churches and canal miles, the gradual accumulation of urban density as London approaches. Albert is in first class. Dimitri is beside you again, angled, the established compromise. Sasha is across, reading, occasionally not reading. You look out the window. The light is different today from the outward journey. It was morning then, and it's afternoon now, October afternoon light, the specific golden bronze angle that October light takes in England when it bothers to appear, which it doesn't always, but which today it's decided to do with commitment. The fields are bright with it. The canal catches it. A church tower somewhere in the near distance catches it on its stone face and holds it for a moment before the train passes and the light moves on. Beautiful, this country. You have not always thought about it as beautiful. Growing up in it, you took it for granted the way you take anything granted that is simply always there. But the circuit has given you the ability to see it. The way leaving a place and returning gives you the ability to see what you couldn't see when you were inside it. The country that contains Holt, where your mother is, where Clara is learning dressmaking and Miriam is good at arithmetic, where your father's grave is in the churchyard of the church you were christened in, where the farm is, the farm that is not yours in any immediate sense now, but is made of your history, every field of it, every hedgerow and drainage ditch, the particular smell of it in October when the ploughing has been done, the smell of turned earth that you cannot reproduce in London no matter how many parks you walk through. You are homesick sometimes. You don't usually let yourself go into it fully, because going into it fully doesn't produce anything useful. It doesn't change the contract or the circuit or the practical realities that brought you here and keep you here. But sometimes, on trains, in the October light, it comes through the guard you've put up and is simply present. You miss the farm. You miss your mother's specific way of making tea, which involves the pot being warmed and the water being a particular temperature and a silence while it steeps. That is its own kind of conversation. You miss the church bells on Sunday that are a different set of bells from London's bells. Smaller, less numerous, with a specific note that you can still hear if you try. You miss the quiet, not the absence of noise. The farm was not quiet in the country's way. It had its own sounds, the animals and the weather and the work, but a quality of quiet that the city never produces, the quality of a place that is not continuously doing everything all at once. This is also part of the account. The full account, the one you're working on, the one you haven't written down but are writing in some internal sense. Not just the money that goes home and the things it makes possible. Not just the circuit and the contracts and the photographs. The homesickness. The mornings in Mrs. Parsons' ground floor room being warm enough, fed enough, safe enough, but also very specifically far from home. All of it. The full account. The train runs south. The light moves. London. Paddington again. The steam and the iron roof and the morning light from the south-facing glass. Except it's evening now, not morning, and the light is the gas lamp version. The station's own lamps, the lamps on the cabs and carriages waiting outside, the general glow that London produces from its million gas jets and its concentrated human activity. A glow that on clear evenings can be seen from 20 miles out. A warm stain on the underside of the clouds. You carry your bags through the concourse. Your bag, your garment bag over the shoulder at the specific angle. The boots in their bag. The book. The letter in the inside pocket. People move past you in both directions with the specific purpose of people who know exactly where they're going and are already slightly late for it. Several of them look up at you as they pass, the quick recalibration, the double take, the forward motion barely interrupted. You know this. You're used to it. You navigate through it the way you navigate through the station itself, purposefully, with enough awareness of the space to avoid the collisions, moving at a pace that allows you to be seen and accounted for in people's spatial calculations before they arrive at the point of encounter. Outside, the October air is different from Sheffield's October air. Less steel, more coal, more people, more the concentrated smell of the city that you've been away from for 10 days, and that now, returning, hits you with a clarity it doesn't have when you're inside it all the time. A cab to Old Pie Street, Mrs. Parsons' door, the stick in the frame, the sideways pressure with the key. "Mr. Marsh," says Mrs. Parsons from the hallway, having apparently been in the hall, though for what purpose is unclear. "Welcome back." "Thank you, Mrs. Parsons. Your room is ready. The fire was laid an hour ago." "That's very kind." "There's a letter," she says. "Came Thursday. I've put it in your room." "A letter? Your room? The ceiling of 6'4", the crack running northeast towards centre, the fire already going, the warmth already established, the wooden extension at the foot of the bed, the bench at the right height, the small window that looks out onto the wall of the house next door. The letter is on the table by the bed. It is in a handwriting you don't recognise. Not your mother's careful hand. Smaller, faster, the handwriting of someone who writes a lot and has made certain concessions to efficiency. The return address is a set of chambers in Gray's Inn, a solicitor's office. You sit on the bed and open it. It is from someone writing on behalf of a man named John Marsh, your uncle, your father's brother, who you have met twice, at your grandfather's funeral and at your father's funeral, and who you remember as a large, rough man with a farmer's hands and a way of looking at you as a child that suggested he found the height unsettling rather than remarkable. Your uncle apparently has died, and has left you something. It takes you a few minutes to read through the legal language, because the legal language is its specific self, but the core fact, when you extract it, is this. Your uncle had no children. He had a small holding in Norfolk, not in Holt, but in a village 12 miles north of Holt near the coast. He has left this small holding to your mother, with the specific provision that it passes, upon your mother's death or sooner if she agrees, to you. You read it again. Land. A small holding, Land in Norfolk, 12 miles from where you grew up. It is not large. The solicitor's letter gives dimensions that translate to approximately 40 acres, which is not a grand estate but is a working farm. The kind of farm where a person could, with appropriate management and reasonable weather, produce a living. Not a wealthy living, not a comfortable living in the city sense, but a living. You sit on the bed for a long time, the fire cracks. London goes on outside, doing its London things, the carriages and the voices and the barrel organ somewhere. The general vast machinery of 800,000 people doing everything simultaneously. You hold the letter and think about 40 acres of Norfolk and the smell of turned earth in October and the sound of your mother's specific way of making tea and your sisters doing dressmaking and arithmetic in a house that is whole. You think about the contract. 2 more years. 2 more years and then free agent, journeyman, whatever you choose. 2 more years and then your own choices, in the light of everything that 2 more years will have added to what you already know, which is already more than you knew when you were 20 years old in a room above a pub in Norwich, reading a document in insufficient light. The next Sunday you go back to St. James's Park at 10 o'clock. Dallow is there. He's standing by the lake looking at the pelicans, and when you approach he turns and the notebook is in his coat pocket, not in his hand. He has brought, somewhat unexpectedly, 2 cups of coffee from a cellar near the gate, and he holds one out to you. "I didn't know if you took it," he says. "Black," you say. "Thank you." You walk along the lake with the coffee. The October air has the specific October morning quality, cold enough to see your breath, warm enough in the sun to take off your hat. The pelicans do their pelican things. Leaves. "I've been thinking about what you said," Dallow says, "about the information belonging to the person. And I think you're right. The question is what that implies for how I do my work." He drinks his coffee. "I've been writing about these cases for 8 years. I've been telling myself that the scientific record matters, that accurate description serves the public understanding, and that both of these things justify writing without always asking. And I think I've been, not wrong exactly about the value of the scientific record, but incomplete in my accounting of what the writing costs." "Did Albert tell you to say that?" Dallow looks at you. "Albert Fry wrote me a letter that contained certain observations in his specific style," he says. "I'd be lying if I said the letter was entirely without influence." "Albert, you start to speak," Dallow says. "The piece I'm writing, I want it to be different from my previous work. I want it to include what the experience is actually like, from the inside, not pathology, not taxonomy, the actual experience. Including the parts that are complicated, especially those. You look at the lake. Then we'll need more than one conversation, you say. I assumed so, and I want to read it before it goes out. Agreed. And you talk to Agnes if she'll speak to you. I've already approached her. She said she'd think about it, which she's said to several journalists over the years, so I'm not certain what it means in this specific context. With Agnes, it means she hasn't decided yet. She will decide. When she decides, you'll know. You know her well. I know her as much as she permits, which is more than most people get. You finish the coffee. The park is filling up with Sunday people, the families, the couples, the occasional solitary walker, with the look of someone who is here for the thinking rather than the looking, the city's population finding its weekly hour of green. Tell me about before, Dallow says. Before what? Before the company, before the circuit, before all of this. He gestures vaguely at the general concept of your professional life. You were from Norfolk, the programme says. What was it actually like? And here, unexpectedly, with the pelicans doing their thing and the October light doing its thing and the coffee cup warm in your hands, you start to tell him. Not the promotional version, not the account that Cooper would have given, or that Mr. Crane's programme presents. The real version. The farm and your father and the debts and the spring of 1880, and a man named Cooper who came to Holt asking about tall people. The room above the pub, the insufficient light, your mother's face when you told her you'd found work. The way she didn't ask what kind of work, because some questions protect their asker. The train to London, Liverpool Street Station in the October steam, standing on your first platform, in front of your first audience, trying to find the face that Albert hadn't yet taught you, and being, for those first few minutes, simply terrified. And then, gradually, not terrified. And then, this elongated present tense in which you're still figuring out what it means to be the thing you're in the city you're in, with the contracts you've signed and the people you've met and the back that makes its morning report, and the letter in your inside pocket from Holt. Dallow writes, you talk. The part goes about its Sunday. 3 weeks later, Peter leaves the company. It happens between Tuesday and Wednesday of the second London run, while you're sleeping, while Mr. Crane is presumably sleeping, while most of the city is sleeping in its various ways. Mrs. Hartley and her magistrate and whatever paperwork was finalised in whatever office, at whatever speed timing and paperwork allow, produced the outcome that was aimed for. By Wednesday morning, Peter has gone from the boarding house. Mrs. Parsons does not know where he is, which is the point. Mrs. Parsons not knowing makes it genuinely not her problem to manage. Mrs. Fletcher presumably knows, Mrs. Hartley knows, Albert knows. Mr. Crane finds out at set-up on Wednesday afternoon. You watch the process. He finds out from one of the other performers, not from you, because the information flows to him through the channels it flows through, and what you see is the sequence, the finding out, the face that he makes, the moustache that he touches, once, twice, 3 times in the fast succession that is the high end of the frequency range, and then the expression that settles. It is the expression of a man who has calculated something and arrived at an answer he doesn't like but can accept. He says nothing for a long moment. Then he turns to the set-up work, with the quality of someone who has decided that what has happened, and the relevant question is now what comes next. He doesn't look at you. He doesn't look at Albert, who is standing near the back wall with his bishop at a garden party expression, having positioned himself where he can watch everything, and has clearly been watching everything. We need someone for Thursday, Mr. Crane says to the room in general. I'm going to contact the Smythe agency. Someone talk to Hutchins about adjusting the Thursday programme. That's it. That's the response. Not the anger you and Albert prepared for. Not the extended moustache touching. Not the contraction of goodwill. Or if there's a contraction, it's so precisely managed that it doesn't surface in the first 20 minutes. He is a businessman. The show continues. The question is what continues in it. After the setup, Albert catches your eye across the room and nods once, just once. The way a bishop nods at the conclusion of a satisfactory service, the London run, 3 weeks of it, the aquarium again, the gas lamps, the platform, the backdrop with the classical scene and the repaired corner. You see Dallow twice more, both times in St. James's Park, both times with coffee. He shows you the draft of the first section of his piece on the third meeting, which is on a Saturday morning before the afternoon set-up, and you read it sitting on a bench with your long legs extended in front of you, and the cold October air going November around the edges. He has written about you with the precision he always brings, and he has also written about you with something that might be called care, or its approximation, the attempt to render a person accurately rather than categorically, which is not the same as success, but is, you think, a genuine attempt. There are things you want to change. You tell him. He considers them with the seriousness that they require, not capitulating to everything, but engaging with the substance of your objections, which are mostly about framing rather than fact. This line, you say, the performer's condition is one of inescapable visibility, a state more analogous to the examined specimen than the exercising of professional skill. The last part, I can revise, he says. It's not wrong, you say. It just's not complete. The professional skill is real. It's not the same as being a specimen. It's also not entirely different, and those two things have to be in the same sentence somehow. He writes something in the notebook. He revises. The piece goes to the journal before Christmas, with your name in it as someone who spoke to the writer, and with a paragraph that Agnes agreed to, which is not what she originally wanted to say, but is what she was willing to have attributed to her, which is its own kind of achievement. November. November in London is the densest version of London. The coal smoke and the famous fog that isn't really fog, but is the coal smoke meeting the Thames damp in the specific combination that produces something denser than either alone. The foggy dark that settles over the city some evenings in November and December, and makes the gas lamps into individual islands of orange light separated by grey nothing. The city becoming a series of illuminated moments rather than a continuous surface. You walk through it on evenings when the show ends early enough and there's enough time before the fog becomes the specific variety that makes navigation by anything other than memory impossible. You walk through it knowing the streets well enough to walk them in reduced visibility, which is the knowledge of a city that is only available after time, after months of the same streets in the same weather and at different times, the knowledge of a place that has entered you the way places enter people gradually over time. It has entered you. London is in you now, in the way that Holt is in you. Differently weighted, differently placed in the architecture of who you are, but present, real, not a temporary occupant, but a permanent one. This doesn't solve anything. The contract still has 18 months on it. The back still makes its morning report. The photographs still sell in the lobby without producing income for you. Mr. Crane still wears the red coat on Friday and Saturday and the brown coat on Tuesday and Wednesday, and the difference still tells you something about the day's emotional weather before you get to the stage. But something is different from the version of you that stepped off a train at Liverpool Street Station 2 years ago. Something has been added. The Edinburgh Physician's Exercises, which Ellis endorsed, and which have made the morning accessible rather than dreaded. The crack in Mrs. Parsons' ceiling, which you can read by now the way a sailor reads the sky. It tells you things about the building, about the season, about the cold. The face, the patient blank face that Albert taught you, which is a professional tool and also, you've realised, a thing you can choose to put on and take off, which means you have more control over when you are the exhibit than you did when you arrived. The letter in your inside pocket, which is now from January because you replaced it with the latest one. Clara has completed her first commission, a dress for the farmer's wife, which Clara described with the specific combination of technical detail and personal satisfaction that you recognise as a person finding their thing. The letter from the solicitor's office, now folded into the letter from your mother, because that's where it belongs. 40 Norfolk acres. 2 years' worth of patience and continuing, and then choices made in the light of everything you know. One more thing before the day closes. Sunday evening, late November. You're in Mrs. Parsons' ground floor room. The fire is going. The extra blanket is on the bed for later. The extension is fitted. Albert knocked this afternoon and gave you a book, which is what Albert does. Materializes a book when something in the current situation suggests one is needed, though how he determines this is opaque. The book is Darwin. The Origin of Species, the 3rd edition, somewhat battered at the spine. I've been carrying this for 30 years, Albert said, when he gave it to you. I think you're the next appropriate reader. You read it for an hour before supper. It is about variation. It is about the fact that variation is how the world works, that the systems of the world proceed through difference, that what looks like error or abnormality from inside one framework is, from a larger view, the process by which everything changes and adapts and continues, that there is no standard deviation from which all variation is measured except the standard you apply, and the standards are chosen, not given. You sit with this. You think about the 8-year-old girl who said you were like a big loaf of bread. You think about Eliza, who cannot find a context in which she is seen as herself. You think about Peter, who is somewhere in Sheffield in a room that is his, learning whatever is next for him. You think about Albert reading the newspaper, angry and peaceful simultaneously, 50 years of making peace with things that required it. You think about the farm, you think about the show, you think about the fact that both of these things are yours, both the Norfolk land and the platform in the gaslight, both the morning exercises in the cold yard and the letter in your inside pocket, both the crack in the ceiling and the backdrop with the repaired corner, and that they don't contradict each other as much as you thought they would when you were 20 years old, and trying to figure out how to hold the complicated truth of your own life. Everything is real. You close the book. The fire burns down toward coals. The room holds the warmth. Outside, London turns toward midnight in its particular way. The noise dropping in register, the frequencies of early evening giving way to the frequencies of late night. The carriages fewer, the voices farther apart, the barrel organ long since done for the day and dreaming of its next commission. You pull the blanket up, the ceiling is there, the crack running northeast. You know it the way you know your own hands. Tomorrow is Monday. There is a show. There are set up at noon, and the afternoon showing at 3, and the evening at 7, and the post-show supper, and the walk back in November cold. There's also a letter to write to your mother. There's also a letter to write to the solicitor's office about the small holding, asking questions about its current management and condition, because knowing what you're going to do with it requires knowing what it is, which requires information. There is also a conversation to continue with Dallow, who is writing a second piece and has said he wants to understand the social dynamics of a travelling company, which is a genuinely interesting subject that you find yourself thinking about in ways that go beyond what's required for one journalist piece. All of this is tomorrow. Tonight is just this: the room, the fire, the sounds of the city going quieter, the blanket and the book and the letter in the inside pocket. You are warm enough, fed enough, safe enough. Your back is better than it was 2 months ago. Your knees are a concern but a managed one. The headaches have reduced. Ellis says this is the exercises working, which is the exercises doing what they were supposed to do, which is the world occasionally being the way it's supposed to be, which is not always true but is true enough. The fire drops another level. The room is the temperature it will be until 3 in the morning. You close your eyes. London outside is the city you have learned. Street by street, boarding house by boarding house, back corridor by back corridor. The landlady who asks questions and the one who doesn't. The fishmonger on the Strand who knows your face and doesn't stare. The pelicans in St. James's Park doing their thing with fish in the morning light. The specific quality of the gas lamps in the aquarium when they're working right. The smell of sawdust and grease paint and cheap tobacco, and 200 people being genuinely astonished by something. It is the city that contains you, and the city that you contain, both directions, both real. The church bell somewhere in the distance marking an hour. Another. The sound fades into the general quiet. You're in 1882 in a boarding house on Old Pie Street in London, which is the greatest city in the world by every measure that the people who measure things in 1882 choose to apply. You're 22 years old. You came here with a bag and 4 shillings and a contract signed in insufficient light, and a body that the world finds remarkable, and you have been here long enough to have found, in the middle of the remarkable and the difficult and the contractual and the cold morning assessment of what the body will do today, something that is enough, not everything, not perfect, not the version of the story where all the complications resolve cleanly and the ending is unambiguous and the account settles into a simple moral, but enough. The kind of enough that comes from time and attention and the willingness to be the full complicated reality of what you are in the full complicated reality of where you are, without resolving either into something simpler than the truth. The fire is coals, the room is warm, 7 feet and 1 inch, and the world is still for this hour, the size of a room with a ceiling you know. Let it come. Let sleep come the way it comes to Thomas William Marsh on a winter night in a city that has made its peace with his size and his backstory and his contract and his 40 acres, or is in the process of making it, which is the closest thing to peace that most processes arrive at. Let the sounds go. Let the ceiling go. Let the fire go to ash. You've earned this rest. The same as every other working person in this city, in every other room along every other street, who woke before dawn and did their work and ate their supper, and came home in the dark and told themselves whatever truth they needed to tell themselves about what the day had been and what the next day would be. The same as all of them. You're one of them. You belong here. Good night.